And we're live, Robert.
I'm
And
ready. Are you
we're
ready? This is
live,
a big
Robert.
day. This is a huge day. It is the rubber match between Magnus and Hikaru. So, what do you think?
I think what everybody in the audience here thinks. I can't wait to see the games. This was an epic match yesterday where Hikaru was able to come back after losing the first mini match. Now it's tied 1-1. The winner in this best of 4 mini match is going to go on to the final. We have the two best rapid slash blitz players in the world here. Could you be any more pumped?
I could be more pumped, probably, but it only would take, I'm trying to think what that would take. Like maybe a pint of ice cream coming my way. So, if that could be arranged, I'd be pretty pumped about that. But no, there's really very few things in life more exciting than GMHikaru taking on the mighty Magnus in a rubber match here in the Lindor's Abbey Rapid Challenge.
Chat, maybe we could do a no. I'm not gonna poll you guys because you guys are here watching on Hikaru's channel. It's not time for polls yet. Robert, can you talk a little bit about what you think Hikaru and Magnus's strategy are going to be going into this game?
Well, Hikaru laid it out for us yesterday. He was saying that if you can get out to a lead, then of course you have the advantage in top level chess. A draw tends to be the most likely result. So if you can just win that first game, now you put so much pressure. You talk about the expectations going forward after that. You didn't have to stop playing your brand of chess and playing kind of must win chess, which is a tough place to be. So Magnus Carlsen gets the white pieces in the first game. Hikaru Nakamura will have to withstand the pressure. He was not able to in the first match between these two guys, but we'll see if he's able to this time.
Right, because if Hikaru is able to even draw the first game with the black pieces, as he mentioned, he'll have 2 whites out of 3 moving forward. He'll have white on the last game. So I'm excited to see what opening he's going to pick out here. But one thing that really scares me about Magnus, well, there's a lot of things because he's so good at chess, right? Is his opening preparation. What kind of opening preparation do you think he's going to go for today?
I What you have to learn about Magnus
Style,
Carlsen.
style, not like
Well,
specifics.
no, I was going to say is you have to expect the unexpected. So he'll come up with just really bizarre looking concepts that are actually quite good once you really go dig deep and analyze that. So I think that Hikaru also has a great opening base. He's really well prepared. He understands a lot of structures. Part of that's actually helped by the fact that he plays so much online blitz, where he's just playing different things all the time. And maybe it's not playing against Magnus Carlsen, playing with more time on your clock, so your opponents have more time to figure out the best moves. But still, you get a good foundation for a variety of different openings, and that could work out in his favor.
Definitely. And I just want to pull up the format. Let me get it on the screen here. So, for those of you who maybe this is your first time tuning in, for those of you who need a refresher, the format for the Lindor's Appy Rapid Challenge has been a best of 3 matches. So we saw the first 2 matches yesterday and the day before. Each of these matches consist of 4 games. The pairings, I mean, you guys already figured out it's going to be Hikaru versus Magnus today. The time control, each players are going to have 15 minutes. They get an extra 10 seconds each time they make a move. And if you get 2.5 points at some point in the mini match, you move on. If it's 2-2, then you go to Armageddon, which is going to be where white has 5 minutes on the clock, black has 4 minutes on the clock with draw odds, and we have it on the scene as well.
And the higher seed chooses the color, and that's important because Hikaru Nakamura finished as the top seed after the round robin preliminary stages of this event. So that means if they get to Armageddon, Hikaru will have the choice of taking the white pieces with the extra minute, but being in a must-win situation, or taking the black pieces where he only needs a draw, but down a minute on the clock. I think he would take the black pieces, but we have to wait and find out, don't we, if we get there.
Right. I mean, we've seen him take the black pieces in the past before, but of course, his strategy could change depending on who he's playing with. If he feels like he's gotten better positions against Magnus with the white side of the pieces, maybe we'll see a shift there. Either way, I mean, if this match goes to Armageddon, I think we're all going to be super excited to watch it. I mean, the excitement will be at an all-time high.
I mean, I don't even know what I would do. Like I think I would have to almost stop talking or start speaking like an auctioneer, as I tend to do when I get into blitz games. And I'm like, oh, the bishop here, not here. Oh my gosh, see that move, blah, blah, blah. And then you just got to keep going with it, right? You just have to do it because when you get to a blitz game, you don't have much time.
That's already energizing me, Robert. I love it. I love it.
People saying upgraded Hess. Yeah, I feel upgraded. I got my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles shirt on. I'm ready. I'm feeling quite like Donatello today. So hello
My
to
dad
everybody
is in
who's
the
watching.
chat and he said, "Good morning, Robert. Nice to see that your middle school shirts are still a good fit."
Some of us haven't grown since we were in like seventh grade. So that does feel very accurate. I don't know how Papa Botez knows that, but it hurts a little bit. I
No,
felt
Papa Botez is the biggest Hess fan ever.
it's okay, Papa Botez. My dad will probably join the chat at some point, and then you guys can, have a nice friendly
And your dad could
conversation.
put down my shirt. It will be
No,
even.
my dad would never do that.
Oh, wow, Papa Moses. No, but everybody has been complimenting your choice today. In chat before the stream, Robert was considering should he go for, a more basic shirt or go for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and it's clear he's made the right decision.
Well, I did say, I guess we're becoming that tight where now I'm going to ask you for wardrobe advice because normally I just pick whatever I want. Today I was like, Alexandra, what do I do? This is
I
a
know
big moment.
our friendship is evolving. It's very exciting.
It is. It really is. And we have 2 minutes left. So, what do we talk about? I'm just so excited for the actual games that I don't even know what to talk about in these remaining, now 1 minute.
Well, maybe we could remind everyone that yesterday we saw Daniel Dudov take on Dinglu Ren, and has already won, so he's going to be making it to the finals. Today, the winner between Magnus and Hikaru are going to take on Dubov in the finals to see who is the champion of the Lindor's Abbey Rapid Challenge. And that's interesting because he is Magnus Carlsen's second. He helps him with his opening preparation. So, it's if Magnus wins, then he has to play against somebody who he's worked with intensively. And if Hikaru wins, it's like he has to get another shot at someone on Team Magnus.
Neil Dubov, what a beastly performance. But let's bring up the player cards for each of these two because I know everybody in GMHikaru chat, they know Hikaru from his streams, from his personality.
I just pulled it up.
But some of his accomplishments may be a bit foreign to them. He is the number one rated player on chess.com in Blitz. That's really tough to do. As we saw a certain, not just quite a menu garden variety player trying to take that number one ranking from Hikaru, but it didn't happen. Then he's been the world number one ranked Blitz player in over the board chess since January 2020. And of course, five-time US champion and winner of the Gibraltar tournament, Olympic gold medalist. You get the picture. Speed chess champion 2 years in a row. Pretty good stuff.
Yeah, and I'm pulling up Magnus Carlsen's card now as well.
Alrighty. And you see that Magnus, the number one rated player of all time. So I think you get it. That's all you really need to say when you get to Magnus Carlsen. The highest rated chess player of all time since 2010. He's had the number one ranking. The world chess champion in classical chess since 2013. Has not lost that title. 3-time world rapid champion. 3 times consecutively he's won the World Blitz Championship, and he also won in 2009, 2014, and he is the 5th seed in this event, whereas Hikaru Nakamura is the top seed.
And I pulled up Hikaru's card. You can't see the top seed on it, but that's why we just told you instead. So back to us. The games will be starting soon. I am just keeping an eye out to see when they're being relayed. So in the next minute, we're going to get the first action here. It's going to be Magnus starting off with the white pieces, Hikaru starting off with the black pieces. If Magnus is able to get a win in the first game, as Robert mentioned, that is going to be a huge advantage for him. But if Hikaru is even able to draw the first game with the black pieces, then he's going to get 2 whites out of 3 moving forward. So it's going to give a little bit of a psychological edge, as he mentioned to us in the interviews yesterday.
Yeah, and here as we wait for the games, also looking over there and seeing that, hey, the which shirt poll, TMNT, they won.
Of course it did. Of course it did.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, teenage. All right, sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm really amped here. All right, we got the game.
Like to see. That's what we like to see.
The match has
started. All right, I am about to. I'm pulling it up. I'm going to get the live board updated as well. Maybe you can run us through the current position while I do that.
Sure. Some heroes have half shells. You have no shell, but you have brought up the live board, so everybody is happy.
There we go.
This is all opening theory at this point, and what we've seen now that we're getting to this live position is that black is currently down 1 pawn, but that pawn on c6 can be captured right now. White, there it is, it's captured. So material equality. White has the bishop pair, so the bishop on f4 has no counterpart, but at the same time, there are sort of many weak squares in both sides' position here the E3 square, the C3 square on white's end of things, and on black's end of things, some of the queenside squares aren't exactly so happy either. Whether it's B5, white would love to put a bishop on E4 if you ever move the knight away from F6. So it seems like I tend to like this position for white for the time being, but then a few moves down the road, I'm like, wait a second, if I can trade those bishops and then infiltrate on some of the light squares, then I start liking black's position.
And Hikaru is soon going to play his bishop to g6, challenging the bishop on d3. And it's going to be hard for Magnus to hold on to that bishop because he's also going to be putting pressure on the c2 pawn. One thing I do like about Hikaru's position is the fact that his queen is already a little bit more active. And we often say don't take out your queen too early in the opening or in the middle game. But here the queen is not going to be attacked. It's actually helping put pressure on c2, and the rooks are already connected, so it's going to be easier to activate them.
Yeah, and that's very true. And the thing that is a teeny bit annoying for black's position is the bishop on f4 is already staring out at the pawn on c7. So that means that the queen c6 is required to defend that pawn, and white may consider going queen to d2 and then queen to a5, like going all the way to the queen side to attack the c7 pawn and also put pressure on the a7 pawn. So it's going to be kind of a game of who can actually put more pressure on the opponent's pawns on that side of the board, because the king side, look at black's pawns are f7, g7, h7, all safe and sound. And white's structure is a little bit compromised because of the holes in the dark squares, but you do have a dark square bishop to shore them up.
Yeah, and I've been playing chess with some streamers who focus mostly on other games, and they've been calling this the V-pawn formation. So yeah, the V-pawn formation is not something you want to have next to your king here. And I like that Hikaru instantly played his rook to d8, and now I do love bishop takes d3. Trading off the bishop pair, then he's going to have a knight versus a bishop. The only downside to that, I suppose, is that I would still rather have a bishop in this position than a knight. But at the same time, black also has a safer king side, so the position is looking pretty leveled here, which is what Hikaru was hoping for out of the opening.
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out what Magnus exactly wanted. I guess he has this position here. He's played extremely quickly. Look at the clock, Alexandra.
Okay. I mean, Magnus started with 15 minutes and he's almost at 17, you guys. He is not interested in getting in time pressure, which actually did happen to him in his first game against Hikaru yesterday.
And the reason I bring that up is because the engine evaluation may say even or only slightly better for white, but it goes deeper than that, because there will at some point in the near future be a very complex decision or a strategy that you have to devise from the black side. And if that's the case and you're down on the clock, having a hard time finding it, that's where the biggest advantage comes. Not just the fact that already Magnus has 2 minutes more than he started with, but that he's more familiar with this as he chose the opening. He knew that he wanted to get this today, and Hikaru might not have been aware that this was going to happen.
But Hikaru is also relatively comfortable on the clock, and here he decided not to take the bishop on d3. He put his knight on d5 instead. So what this means is that he likes keeping Magnus's pawn on c2. His knight is looking towards the c3 square potentially. It doesn't have to come there right now, but if Magnus were to make a move like rook b1 or rook d1, then he would have a fork. He goes for knight b4, so he is threatening to take the bishop with his knight, which is kind of in line to what we were talking about, where he would rather have a bishop in this position than a knight. So if he can trade off his knight for the light squared bishop instead, that's definitely an improved trade for him.
That's true. And opposite colored bishops tend to have many tendencies towards equality, because you can't attack the same squares. And he didn't want to open the c file because the queen on c6, the pawn c7, a rook would come to c1 very quickly and start pressuring that side of the board. I expect Magnus to try to play bishop e4 here. And the point is that you want to trade pieces on terms favorable for you. You can take on g6, but then black gets the king safety. And what do I mean by that? Look at the back rank. If those rooks were not there and a white rook or queen ended up in the back rank, the king would have no escape. But if I can take back on g6 with my h-pawn, then my king has an escape route to make sure that there's no potential checkmates in the future. That can gain a vital tempo down the line. So I think
Robert, aren't doubled pawns bad?
They can be bad. In this situation, they aren't bad because they serve a clear purpose. The black king is quite safe. There are not enough white pieces to attack it. But I was just trying to gain a very important, just a single move here that I thought that would help black's chances compared to white's.
Absolutely. And I'm coming back to the current live board. So this seems like the first point in the game where Magnus is actually starting to sit. At what point do you think he started deviating, not deviating, sorry, but becoming less familiar with the theory? So moving away from his home preparation.
It's a great question, and I think when you move away from your home preparations, either because you just can't prepare a million different moves, or your opponent did something you weren't expecting. And what Hikaru has done has been incredibly natural. It seems like he hasn't really done anything major. He just brought his knight from a good score on f6 to a more advanced square on b4. And so I am wondering what exactly Magnus is calculating here. It's whether or not to capture on g6 or to play bishop e4 directly. So this is, even though it looks like what's the big difference between those two moves, there's a different structural element to it, where either you double black's pawn to give the king an escape, or you keep back rank check potential alive for the future and will require black to make an additional move later. Because I don't see any choice right now between, I guess you could go with your bishop in the other direction, like bishop to b5, but losing the c2 pawn right away, you're hoping you'll get the c7 pawn back. It just feels like a more double-edged type of position.
Right, because even if you play something like rook ac1, which is a really common theme, you're putting pressure on the queen and on the pawn on c7. The problem here is that potentially Hikaru could also take the pawn on a2.
Right. That's not a pawn you want to give up. You don't want to give all these queenside pawns, because even if you get them back, you'll never have a real advantage on the king side, where black is very safe and sound.
Absolutely. So going back to the current position, just to summarize, actually I don't have to summarize because bishop e4 was just played. So that means that Magnus does want to keep the back rank threat opportunity alive. He's playing bishop e4 because he also wants to protect his pawn on c2. But what happens after bishop takes e4? Doesn't this give Hikaru the option to create another pawn weakness on Magnus Carlsen's pawn structure?
Well, I think Hikaru's username says it all. Yep.
There
Potential.
you go, Robert. So I'm just going to play it out on the board. So let's say Hikaru decides to take the bishop right away. If we take with the f pawn, we're already creating an isolated pawn. If we take off and trade the queens, queen takes e4, then Hikaru can recapture the queen on e4. And if he takes on c2, then actually that's just a lost knight, so it's not going to work.
But you can trade first on e4 and then try to take on c2.
Yeah.
And I think what Magnus is going for is, as long as he keeps at least one pawn on the queen side, right? The queen side is where the queen starts in d1 and d8. That half of the board is the queen side, the other half is the king side. So if there's one pawn remaining at least on the queen side, the bishop will be stronger than the knight, because they're pawns on both sides of the board. A bishop can attack both sides from one square, whereas a knight has to go on a journey just to then go defend. So that's why having a split board is beneficial for the bishop.
Yeah, and I just went a little bit further into a line where everything would simplify and just trade off. And this is the kind of position that Hikaru wouldn't want to get, where even material, and he's playing with a knight versus a bishop, like Hess just mentioned. So gonna go back to the live board. Bishop e4, queen c3 was played. So Hikaru decided not to trade off the bishop. Why do you think he's keeping the tension here?
He just doesn't want to allow, as you were just showing, a rook taking on c7, landing on 7th rank. It's starting to look quite nice and active for white. Here, on the other hand, white doesn't have that kind of activity. You have to worry about your c2 pawn. Now you have to worry about that rook on d8 coming down to d2, which hits the queen on e2 and also the pawn on c2. So now black is the one that is looking like you're ready to go for more. So now Magnus has to think about, wait, my c2 pawn is under attack. If I move my rook from a1, what about my a2 pawn? Is that a pawn that I'm okay losing? And if I don't move my rook and shore up the d file, what about rook to d2 coming? Does that scare me? So it seems like Hikaru has many ideas coming up in the position, and Magnus needs to figure out which one he will allow.
One thing that is annoying about Hikaru's position is the knight on b4. I wonder what would happen after a move like a3, because that knight doesn't have a lot of good squares to go back to. Can't go to a6, it's going to get captured by the queen. The only square it can go to is c6, but even then, it's cutting off the queen from protecting the c7 pawn, and it is under attack from the bishop.
Yeah, a3, kicking the knight. You'd want to take the pawn on c2 with your knight, but you're like kind of asking for trouble there.
Right, because maybe rook ac1 is very annoying here.
Yeah, rook AC1, but then maybe there's like rook to D2 for black. So you're protecting your knight while attacking your opponent's queen. And that does look like it is holding on, at least for the time being.
True. So maybe that's part of the idea behind Queen C3. He's also helping support his knight by having that rook D2 move in his pocket because now he's protecting it and it wouldn't have been possible before.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, this dynamic, because both sides have been trying to limit their opponent's activity. You saw that instead of taking the bishop on e4, which would have allowed first the queen to e4, and then after the queen, a rook onto e4, where it's on a much more active square because it still used the file it's on, but also has more action along the fourth rank to attack black's pieces. That is why both sides are just saying, let's not trade. Let's
Yep. So
hold
this is
off.
the position that they didn't get into that I just put on the board.
Exactly. And it's a good one to show that rook is so much more active on e4 because once it slides to the side, it'll attack the c7 pawn and the a7 pawn, whereas a rook on e1 doesn't have that same access.
Right. Okay, so rook ad1 played by Magnus here. He is no longer protecting the pawn on a2, although that doesn't feel like a pawn that Hikaru is going to be too eager to capture right away because once the knight does take on a2, maybe he can come back to a1, and that would open up the a file for the white rooks, put pressure on a7 as well as the knight, so he'd be very likely to recapture material here. Instead,
Yeah.
maybe Hikaru just wants to also keep the tension here
And he
and
goes rook
remove the
dd8.
rook trade. Interesting.
Yeah.
So why didn't he
It,
move the other rook there? Because it
so
was the rook that wasn't activated yet.
remember how I said that black wanted the bishop to capture on g6 so that you could get h takes and get space for your king?
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of back rank checkmate ideas available to white with the queen and the rook lining up in the e file. So if after, say, that move knight takes a2, if we just go back a move instead of rook d8, knight takes a2 I think actually loses because I take your rook on d8 first, and then after you take my rook back, I have this move bishop to d5, hitting your knight on a2, and I'm also doing queen e8, sacrificing my queen for checkmate.
Oh, this is a beautiful tactic, Robert. So that's actually the real reason why Hikaru didn't take on a2. And also the reason why Hikaru doesn't want to trade off his rooks, although he could have moved his other rook on over and still defended against checkmate threats. Or was there something wrong with rook f e8? There must have been a bigger issue here.
Probably just worried about the same
Bishop
stuff
takes
around the back
g6
ring.
still works here. That makes sense.
That's
Yeah.
actually a really nice move.
Yeah.
That
Oh,
is a
sorry.
cool
Sorry.
move.
I'll put it on the board again. So bishop takes g6, and Hikaru cannot take the queen here because he's going to get back rank checkmated. If he plays some things like h takes g6 to create an extra square for his king, then you can play queen takes c8, rook takes c8, rook takes c8, king h7. And when you look at the piece count here, Magnus has 2 rooks for a queen, which is favorable. But on top of that, the king is also in a lot of trouble here. Maybe not right away, but in the future, you have ideas like rook d8 trying to go for checkmate here. So to prevent that, Hikaru does want to keep a rook on f8, and he doesn't want to allow any, scary discovery attacks, because if it were Magnus's turn and he decides to play bishop takes g6 here, similar idea. Well, now he can actually take the queen because there is no rook on d8 to capture with back rank checkmate.
Yeah, that's the essential difference. So you're kind of doing something that's odd. You are moving the rook that already looks nicely developed on an open file, but the reason you're doing it is to actually safeguard your king. And it may not seem obvious at first, but the examples that Alexandra was just showing is exactly why Hikaru moved the rook from d8 to e8 rather than the rook on f8 towards the center. So it's a really nice illustration.
Okay, so now it's Magnus's turn to come up with a decision here, and you were talking about how his time advantage showed he was comfortable with his opening. Well, I think that's the same point now. His time advantage shows that, maybe this is not the middle game he had hoped for. It's a little bit more complicated than he might have expected.
It is. There's just a pin on the e file, which is the bishop on e4 can't move because the queen behind it. You were just showing an example of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the queen for white probably should move somewhere. At least that's what my inclination would be. And where does that queen go? Maybe over to f2, because from f2 it hits that pawn a7, and that at least will cause Hikaru to think, do I want to give up that pawn because I know that white's a2 pawn is hanging, and white's c2 pawn may be hanging. So there's like weirdly a lot of calculation to be done here, even though it doesn't look like one of those tactical positions where your kings are getting checkmated, because after queen f2 there might be bishop takes e4, and then you talked about isolated pawn earlier. what happens in this circumstance, I don't really know.
Yeah, there are definitely quite a few variations to calculate here. And I just put queen f2, bishop takes e4, rook takes e4 on the board here. I'm guessing a good move for Hikaru here would be to recapture the rook, f takes e4. And this position starts to have quite a few holes for the white side of the pieces. But Hikaru also will have to calculate if he wants to go into this because, maybe Magnus could take on a7 here. Magnus's rook is the one that is more active. The bishop is also putting pressure on c7. So even though Magnus is thinking it is a double-edged game and both players do have chances here if they're not careful.
Yeah, I like the way you were talking about that. Like the white rook is better than the black rook. Mm-hmm. And you say, wait, but if I win a pawn or if I'm attacking some pawns, isn't that more valuable? I'm just
going to put that position back on the board.
Sure.
Okay. Sorry, continue.
No, I was just saying that what you were saying was great. It's like people think I'm attacking a pawn, so I must be doing well. But you've given your opponent control of the only real open file. Your pawn on c7 is already under attack from the bishop. The pawn on a7 is under attack from the queen. So that knight on b4, queen on c3 configuration looks pleasant for black. But you can only take one pawn at a time. And so some of these practical elements here favor white. And that's probably why both these players are deep in thought, trying to figure out, is it good for black to attack the pawns? Is it good for white to liquidate a bit and have some clarity in what you're going to go for?
True, but 6 minutes on the clock, having half of Hikaru's time is actually going to be something that might play a substantial role here. That is quite the heavy time advantage. And on top of that, you have the traditional advice, think on your opponent's move. So Hikaru hasn't just been sitting there waiting for Magnus to move. He's also been spending that time calculating. So queen d2 played. That is not the move we expected. He's offering up a queen trade. Queen takes d2, rook takes d2. It would activate his rooks, and I'm guessing that even if he gets a worse pawn structure, that might make his king a little bit more comfortable. Maybe Magnus is trying to simplify the pieces because he's more comfortable knowing that there's no way he's going to lose if he gets into a rook and minor piece endgame.
Yeah, there may be no way he wins, but there's also no way he loses, as you were saying. And so that's actually probably what he's aiming for. But I should remind not just everybody, but also myself, that there is a draw rule in place. You cannot agree to a draw before move 40. And how does that work in chess? If I offer Alexandra a draw during a game that we're playing,
I would take it and never play you again so that I have a good tied score against you, Robert.
Exactly. You can accept it and the game is over. We split the point. But in this tournament, you cannot do that. So there are ways to make draws. There's a thing in chess called the 3-time repetition. If the same exact position has happened 3 times, the game ends as a draw. And the reason why is you might be making the best moves. And so both sides have no choice. And you're just repeating. And okay, what's the point of continuing if you're forcing somebody into a worse decision? So I just want to point that out, that the players, even though queen d2, in my eyes, is kind of like, we're trading off some stuff. Maybe I feel like the position is just equal. They have to play it out, and I think that does cause more decisive games.
All right. Well, so one move that looks interesting here for Hikaru is knight takes a2 because that protects his queen. It also grabs a pawn. Of course, it's not just a free pawn because c7 is hanging as well. But that is another option that he can consider in addition to queen takes d2. Or he can say, you know what? I feel like I have the edge here. I'm up on time. I would like to keep queens on the board and keep it complicated. Still, though, that would be a very risky play. Not risky, but a riskier mindset where he's forcing for a win.
Yeah, queen c4, it's one of those moves where you're like, my opponent doesn't have much time, or at least compared to me. I'm up 3 minutes on the clock. Queen c4 attacks some stuff, but it also allows white to firmly control the open file. If the queen and the knight can't start taking pawns, if I can push you back, then you're kind of asking for trouble more so than asking for a good thing. And in fact, after queen c4, I think c3 is a good move because if you play knight takes a2, you're like, oh, I'm going to go take your pawn. Then bishop d5. And once again, your queen on c4, your knight on a2, that spells trouble.
It definitely does. Okay, so queen c4 isn't an option there. What about knight takes a2?
Aha. I kind of like knight takes a2, but probably what Magnus is hoping for is after the queen trade on c3. Actually, never mind. My rook on d1's under attack. I was going to play bishop to c6. Well, actually, I can play bishop c6, but I blundered, honestly. But thankfully, it works out. Look at that. That's how good chess can be sometimes.
Right, because even if the knight captures your rook on d1, then you can recapture the rook on e8, winning the material right back. So this idea could actually work. Um, say knight takes d1 instead. I guess you could either take the knight or the rook on e8 here.
Yeah, just take with the bishop on e8, I think, and then
Hmm.
the knight on d1's under attack, the pawn on c7's under attack. I think that black is doing totally fine. It just is one of these positions where if you're not careful, things can go wrong.
Right. So again, we mentioned this earlier, but people are tuning in. Hikaru said that if he's able to get a draw in the first game, then he feels like he has a slight advantage because he'll have 2 out of 3 whites, including the last game here. How likely do you think it is that Hikaru will try to push for a little more in this game? Just because it seems like his play has been easier in the middle game and with the clock situation. Well, he
Well,
just started making some moves. He's making your answer easier, Robert.
I'm glad because you always pose the most difficult questions to me, and now I feel that I don't have to answer it. I will let the players answer the question. I think that right now, with pieces getting traded, the draw is becoming the most likely result because the bishop on g3, yes, it hits the c7 pawn, but the knight is already attacking the a2 pawns, putting pressure on c2. So I do think see a mass exchange on the queen side, and if that happens, there's just not enough remaining material for me to see how either side will play for a win.
Right. And now it's Hikaru's turn to move. One thing that he has to do at some point is move his rooks to better square. I mean, the rook on f8 has no squares it can go to, so maybe a nice simple move like rook d8, offering up the queen trade, making some space for his rook. And if Magnus decides to double up, rook e d1, reinforce his rooks, he can probably even just trade off and then bring his rook to e8, put pressure on e4.
Yeah, and if you just go right after that pawn, it's on a light square. You'd force white to push the pawn probably to e5, which is protected by the bishop. But then the bishop looks like a worse piece behind that pawn, whereas it's been attacking the pawn c7 first. So knight takes a2 was chosen by Hikaru. He said, "I'm just going to take your pawn, and you can go ahead and take my pawn on c7, but it's just a trade. And you're trading pieces down, not so much left, not much to attack once you're taking the weak points from both sides. It does feel like, unless this knight somehow gets stranded on a2, which it won't,
Because he
then
can move
black should be
back
totally
right
fine.
away.
Right. You don't want to leave that knight there too long because if you give white one free move, so let's say instead of that knight moving back, you play a move like h6.
Then you got bishop a5 taking away all of the horse he's escaped squares. Oof.
Yeah, that's what I'd be looking for. Right? Just trap that knight in there, and that's why knights can be so bad on the rim. You hear that expression, right? That little slogan: "Knights on the rim are dim."
Right.
And the reason why is they just don't have squares to move to from the side of the board, and the bishop would do a great job of cutting it off.
I'm just smiling because chat keeps bringing up the double spaces on my title between FIDE and Master. I know you guys, it's unwatchable. Those double spaces, I really have to be grateful for you guys because you're still sticking with us despite, the big errors in this production. Okay, so Magnus is thinking here. Other than taking on c7, can he play rook d7 as well? We know that putting the rooks on the 7th are one of the most important squares in these endgame style positions, and it seems like he keeps it a little bit more complicated. His rooks are more active, so it's a way of pressing that even further, and a move like rook d7 also stops the immediate plan that Hikaru might have had, which would be to activate his rooks by playing something like rook d8, because you can't play rook d8, you're going to lose the pawn on c7 in a way that also puts pressure on a7, and it seems like it would give Magnus a little bit more of an edge.
I'm with you. I think that putting the rook on d7 is a good choice, and it just says I'm going to try to be active here, and I'm going to win your pawn on c7 no matter what. Because if you push your pawn from c7, then I win your a7 pawn. So I should say I'm winning a pawn back no matter what. So that's the good news for Magnus. But in terms of playing for a win, it still doesn't feel like enough because finally that black knight should probably retreat back to b4, and then the white rook will take on c7, which takes a pawn and protects the pawn on c2 at the same time. But then we could see more trades happen if the black rook scoots right in front of the white rook and says, let's keep trading pieces. Let's liquidate. I'm not going to lose this game. I don't even want to risk anything.
Right. But would you play rook c8 right away because if rook takes a7, then you could just recapture on c2.
That's what I would do for sure. Just keep trading. I'm
Mm-hmm.
happy to.
Just keep trading. There you go. So rook e3 was played instead. It looks like he's trying to move his rook to a3 and put in pressure on the a7 pawn, which he feels like would be a better pawn for him to capture because then he can continue attacking the c7 pawn as well.
So honestly, one of the like obscure, brilliant moves that we've seen allow Magnus Carlsen to win games that don't look winnable. And I'm not saying he's going to win this game, but rook e3 was not on my radar at all. But what he's saying is like, I'm going to try to go for the queen side directly. I don't care about my e4 pawn. If I can create an imbalance, giving up my e4 pawn, but winning both of black's queen side pawns, a7 c7, now we have an asymmetrical pawn structure. We already have an asymmetrical pawn structure, but we have a situation where black has an extra pawn on the f through h files, white has a c pawn, and that's the dynamic that, especially with a bishop, that you play to win. So I really like this move, rook to e3. It puts the onus right back on Hikaru. You have to find an accurate move here so that you don't get in trouble.
Okay, and speaking of accurate moves, f5 looks kind of like a fun move. I doubt that Hikaru is going to play it, but it's a move that wasn't as tempting before. The reason it's tempting now is because the rook is on a square where it's not protected. Before it was on e1, the bishop was protecting the rook. And whenever you see some kind of pin opportunity, it's always worth considering.
Yeah, f5, trying to take advantage of that. Also threatening f4 if you don't react well. f4 forks the bishop and the rook. So I think that with the rook on e3, Max would likely swing the rook over to a3. But more big picture for a second is that by pushing a pawn to f5, you've exposed more of the seventh rank. And that won't result in a loss or anything like that. It's not like anything that's crazy. But the point is that if my rook can land on d7 and I can put a bishop on attacking the g7 pawn, now I actually have something to attack. But on the flip side, black's king now also has space to run, and there's no back rank checkmates. Eventually, I could put a rook on f7 if I need to defend everything. So you always should assess the pros and the cons of even any individual move.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, f5 looks like a move that would be strategically worse and would only make sense if there was some kind of tactical combination there. Another thing that the rook to e3 is doing is it's taking an escape square away from the knight. The knight can still go to b4, but that could be something that Hikaru still has to watch out for. Because maybe something like rook b3 would be annoying, because that would hold b4 and c3.
Yeah, rook to b3, trying to get that knight. The knight, if it stays there too long, you're absolutely correct. I guess black does have eventually a5 or something like that to try to free the knight up. But you're right that rook to b3 is a move that you don't even consider because you're so focused on the c7 pawn, the a7 pawn, and all of a sudden someone goes rook b3 and like, oh, my knight can't move.
Right. So, in terms of trades here, do you think that rook d8 and trying to trade rooks, is that a good idea for either side, or is it just pretty neutral? I'm going to put rook d8 on the board to show it off.
I think that Magnus may play rook e to d3 and saying, if you take me on d3 now, I take with my c pawn, which now becomes a d pawn, and your pawn on c7 is under attack, your knight on a2 is under attack, and now that I have a d pawn, if I win your c7 pawn, that actually is a really strong passed pawn in the very near future.
Yeah, and it's one of those positions where it feels so much more comfortable to play with as white if he gets here. Ignore the evaluation bar, ladies and gentlemen. This position is not even for a computer to play. Of course, Hikaru would be, incredible at being able to save this position, but I think you'd have to play very precisely with the black side of the pieces to hold it.
Yes, you do. And that's really why I always try to be big picture, not just talk about the specific moves, or I tend not to have the evaluation bar when I'm doing my own commentary, like separately, because it can be a distraction to wait. If you knew at all times that the position was equal, that would actually help you come to a decision. Whereas when you're playing the game by yourself, nobody's over your shoulder saying it's dead zeros across the board. You can make a draw here. You don't have to assess the position for yourself. You don't know. That's where that human element comes in. Otherwise, we'd all be playing perfect chess at every single move.
Exactly. And hey, rook e d8 just played. So if Magnus does play rook e d3, which seems quite likely here. Are there any options for Hikaru to not just recapture back on d3?
Then you'd have to move your rook again. At least psychologically, it's difficult to just move your rook from e8 to d8 and then not trade and not move forward, instead move over to the side, right? It's kind of a tough mental decision to make.
Right. Imagine something like rook c8. You're protecting your pawn, but that just feels awful. Allowing your opponent to have double rooks on the open file and have a move like rook d7 here. Again, maybe it's not so bad because you have moves like knight c3, bringing your knight back into the game, protecting e4 instead of defending c7, so that there's a trade if rook takes c7 or bishop takes c7. But it does feel a little wrong.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, sometimes it's good because you induce your opponent, you provoke your opponent to make some kind of move that they don't want to play. And in this case, moving your rook away from e3 makes the e4 square look a little more vulnerable, right? Because the rook in e3 is the only piece protecting that square. And in that variation you were just showing, once that the rook starts in e3, came up to d7, then at the end of that variation that you just showed, rook e3, rook c8, rook d7, knight c3, now the knight actually can first leave the a2 square, but it also attacks the pawn e4 directly because the rook that was once protecting it is now gone.
Right. And if he decides to make a move like e5, well, okay, first here there's a tactic, there's knight e4, but pretend for a second there isn't. The issue with this would be that you're blocking off your bishop, and your pawn on e5 is going to continue to be a weakness here that could be attacked. So he'd have to play something like, probably, I like rook to d4 just because we want to keep the other rook on d7, but again, you can't play that because there's knight e2. Knights are really tricky pieces sometimes, so he would have to likely retreat his rook from d7 to d4, and this is kind of showing how the tactics in this position would force Magnus into a slightly worse, position than he would ideally want, with a rook on d4 instead of on the 7th rank, just because he has to defend against knight e2 style tactics and knight e4.
Well, Magnus dropped down to a minute and then decided to trade rooks.
Oh.
And
okay, I just skipped ahead. Yeah.
I think we're about to see all the pawns get traded, because after knight to b4 here, if you take on a7, I take on c2, you take on c7. We've removed all of the queenside pawns. And as I mentioned earlier, a bishop really dominates a knight when there's play on both sides of the board. But when play is focused just on one side, the knight certainly holds its own.
Right, and the reason for that is because it's easier for a knight to move around if it's on only half of the board. There's a lot less squares, whereas a bishop can hop on over to the other side of the board very quickly.
Yes, and so knight came back to c6 to protect a7, but you can tell what Magnus is doing. He played c3 rather than just trading and going full on to the endgame. Okay,
the moves were made so quickly, it just hopped on to the new board. I'm just going to catch up there. So after knight c6, rook a6, Magnus is attacking the knight on c6 as well as the pawn on a7 at the same time. So Hikaru has to protect the knight, or he can protect it by attacking the bishop on g3. Rook takes c6, bishop takes g3, rook takes c7, equal pawns here. h5 played so that he doesn't get back rank checkmated. If the pawn on a7 gets captured, then so will the pawn on c3. And all of a sudden, we're in an equal pawn rook and king endgame.
That's right. Rook d3 was a really nice move by Hikaru. And I was actually just about to say that Magnus is doing all he can to play for a win, and that's what he does. And that's how he wins games. Because even if you are objectively have about approximately equal position, he just does these little things that challenge your setup, that makes you protect yourself move after move after move after move. And, well, we get tired, we make slight mistakes, and then he builds up that momentum and turns a slightly better position into a much better one, and then a much better position into a win, better than anybody that I've seen.
Certainly does. And here, I mean, even though the material is even, the structure of the pawns is not. So Magnus has a pawn on e4 that cannot be defended by any other pawn. So a move like rook e3 is both attacking the pawn and holding the king from being able to make any progress. Obviously, it's just a very slight edge, but do you think that Hikaru, with this endgame advantage, has any chances to get more than a draw?
No. And the reason why is, the engine will say black is better. But the thing is, even if white loses this pawn e4, there are things in chess that are theoretical draws. So that even if you're up a pawn, you say, oh man, I can do this. Magnus Carlsen, the highest rated chess player in the world, he knows his theoretical draws. So a 3-on-2 with just rooks on the board and the same side over there, that's going to be a draw. And also look what Magnus is doing. He's not even losing his e4 pawn because he's attacking the f7 pawn, so you can't actually get to the e4 pawn. They've officially made a draw. Let me update the scoreboard here for everybody because this game is in the books.
Yeah, and this was a perpetual. It was also after move 40, so they could have offered a draw. Draw with black pieces. A good result for Hikaru in the first game here, ladies and gentlemen.
Great result. And we're talking about this a lot just because earlier white had a slightly better position, more opportunities to play for an advantage. But Hikaru found an accurate move every single turn, and it never was just more than maybe a little uncomfortable for the time being, where you have to watch out for that bishop. Oh, you have to watch out for the rook coming down to the 7th rank. And with that in mind, Hikaru said, I see all of your threats, and I'm not ignoring them, but I'm going to be able to contain your pieces while doing what I want to do, trading off the pawns on the queen side, getting that knight very active. And it was a really nice, just easy hold. He made it look easy, but it was really much more complex than meets the eye.
It certainly was. All right. Well, I'm going to pull out their player cards one more time for those of you who are watching. So we have Hikaru, who is, world number 4 in rapid time control. But in online chess, especially in Blitz, he's the number 1 rated player. So that is something to keep in mind. Magnus, he doesn't really need a world introduction because he is world number 1. And he has held the world number 1 position in every type of classical format, whether it's rapid or blitz. So definitely a scary opponent for Hikaru to face against, and a fantastic first game for him.
And I want to give a shout out to Rekful because I've seen that Rekful is watching us. So actually I opened up Rekful's stream, and so I saw him watching us, and it was kind of awkward for me as a little, I'm like, wait, what? Am I watching somebody watching me? This is weird. But shout out to Rekful, awesome streamer, and glad you're watch some chess now.
Yeah, definitely. And okay, you guys, I know you've been complaining about the space in my name. So actually, chess.com has been really helpful, and they just sent me a fix. So thank you so much, chess.com. Let me know.
To see the fix.
Yeah, let me know if this is better. And Robert,
more spaces, more.
Don't worry, you guys. See, we reply to your comments. It's all good. We're listening. I mean, we see you up in here in the chat. Okay.
I think we need at least 2 more.
At least 2
Honestly,
more. Yeah, I would like it to go all the way to the edge there.
Yeah, I actually would prefer that your master title goes over to near the start of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on my shirt.
Yeah, so and you could become a master grandmaster.
No, I can become a master Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. That I've become Splinter live in front of everybody here.
Robert is way too excited about this. I feel like he just saw an opportunity for his childhood dream to come true.
I mean, if you didn't love Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as a kid, I don't know what's wrong with you.
No, that's fair. That's fair. Master Hess. Yes, you guys keep spamming it so he can live vicariously through you guys.
I mean, I'll take it. I'll take what I can get. But Master Splinter, what a wise little rat that Master Splinter was.
Certainly. And Robert, I'm just going to take a second to go to the bathroom. Do you need a break as well? Because then I could put the player cards up.
Oh, but we also were sent a new graphic, by the way. So
a new graphic.
Yeah, check this one out. Okay, you got to do this for me.
Oh, okay, I got you. Sorry, I'll update it. I got you, Robert.
I'm so happy.
Your dream is about to come true.
I'm genuinely thrilled.
Okay.
I feel good about it.
Well, I'll be back in a minute then.
All right. Well, then I'll just be here. I'll try to entertain as best as I can.
Okay.
I really don't have much to say, but on a serious note, a chess-related note, that game was one where Hikaru played an excellent game from start to finish. There was quite a bit of opening preparation that Magnus came to the board with an idea saying, I just want to make an easy position for me, one that I have some slight chances to play for more if Hikaru is inaccurate. But Hikaru said, hey, I'm a great chess player. I'm not going to make any mistakes today. And that gives Hikaru the advantage in the remaining 3 games because it's a best of 4 mini match here. So now that game 1 is done, Hikaru gets white in game 2 and in game 4. So 2 whites from the remaining 3 games. And at the top level, having the white pieces is an advantage. Statistically, you look at the results, the player who has the first move advantage does score better than having the black pieces. I wish I could show the opening, but Alexandra is hosting, so she left. And we can come back to the opening when she returns, but unfortunately, I can't do that for you. I'd love to. Sing instead? No, I'm not singing. Come on. This is a serious chess broadcast. No singing. All we're going to do is talk about chess. Hey, you're back.
I'm back.
Thank everything that you're back, because they're trying to get me to sing.
Okay, chat. So sometimes Robert sings before we start the broadcast, and I'm always so tempted to just go live before he knows, but I can't cause those trust issues. But one day.
One day I'm just going to be singing some random song. One day
I won't, because you have a beautiful voice. I need to show it off to the masses.
Wow. I mean, I don't know if I would agree with that, but I appreciate you saying it and lying in front of, 25,000 or however many viewers we have. So thank you for letting everybody know that I have a nice voice, even if I do not.
No, you certainly do. You certainly do. Okay, I feel like maybe I should change this back.
Let's also get the opening. People want to see the opening.
Yep.
I saw some ask questions about that. But what I was going to say is, now I know that what you're up to. So you're going to kind of pick a song. And I'm like, why does Alexandra want to play that song? Like, what's she getting at here? And I'm going to know that you're trying to get me to sing it so that you can live stream it, and then I'm going to embarrass myself.
No, you are going to do the opposite of embarrass. You are going to show off your talents. But okay, let's get started with the opening. So Magnus e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6. This is the 4-pawn opening, and often when people are learning chess, this is what you're taught to do, because you're usually supposed to develop your knights before your bishops. First, you put your pawns in the center, so it's just very classical style chess. And here, Magnus plays d4. He goes for an immediate pawn break in the center. E takes d4, knight takes d4, leading to some exchanges here. And bishop b4, pinning the knight to the king. A nice active move, also preparing black to castle here. Anything you want to add so far in the opening?
So far, very normal. It's just a position where both sides are developing. The pawn e4 is now under attack because the bishop on b4 pins the knight, so that it looks like the knight defends, but some of you may forget that the knight cannot move because it's pinned to the king.
Oh, did I say 4 pawns? I meant 4 knights.
You said 4 pawn. I wasn't going to make mention of it.
No, you definitely should. Thanks for correcting me, chat.
Well, I'm here for you. The chat may be out here to remind you that you said 4 pawns, but you're still a 5-head.
Thanks, Robert.
It's a compliment, right?
That I think is a compliment. Sometimes I fall to like a 1-head, but you know what? Everyone has their moments, and that's okay with me. Okay, so b takes c6. We got a double pawn here for Hikaru, but at the same time, it's also opening up the b file in case he's going to make any, active rook moves there in the future. How common is the 4 knight at high level chess?
Not really that common. It is something you learn as a kid, as you were mentioning, because it teaches you just to develop your pieces, get castled, and sort of the principles of chess are a clear demonstration when you see this opening. But it's not played very often at the highest level. Although the line we saw in the game as we continue down the variation, it actually is one that is relatively common, I'd say, still, because it just you remove yourself from any of the immense tactical complications of some kind of sharp Sicilian defense. And you get to play, as we saw in the game, more calmly, more strategically, going after the pawns. You have a clearer path forward.
And I just want to summarize again for those of you who are joining. This game has already happened, so that's why there isn't a live board. We are waiting for the second game to take place. We are just reviewing the opening that happened here. And I'm on move 8, so after white castled here. And then Hikaru goes for d5, e takes d5. And bishop g4, this is an intermediate move, so he's not replying right away to the pawn on d5. He didn't decide to play c takes d5. Why do you think he went for the queen threat instead?
So c takes d5 is a very common move, the most common move played in this position, and you regain your pawn, and you look at the pawn structure. That black has this pawn on c7, this pawn on d5. So it's you have nothing on the b file. That should be good for black because you'll put a rook on b8 and then use the semi-open file there. And for white, you have the semi-open d file, but you can also start with move bishop to g5. And the move bishop g5 is annoying because you're pinning this knight, and the knight and the queen together protect this pawn on d5, and you need them both on that square. Because let's say you make the move h6, which is actually a move that would not be good. I take your knight on f6, and if you take with the queen on f6, down goes your pawn on d5. Thank you very much, hitting your queen and your bishop. And of course, you do not want to take with your pawn on f6 in the initial position, because then your king becomes very weak.
Yeah, your king would be in serious trouble here. So that is a great point. So let's go back then to the opening as it continued. Okay, so here we go. Bishop g4. Magnus decided to play f3, and this move looks like it's a little bit weakening because we are making a weakness in the king side. One of our dark squares is going to be a little bit more vulnerable, and it's a square that Hikaru does have a dark squared bishop to try to take advantage of. That being said, moving the pawn to f3 right now wasn't actually too dangerous because he anticipated that there would be some piece trades and that, you know, even if Hikaru would try to attack on the king side here, Magnus has enough pieces that are close to the defense. So this was a good way to deal with the threat without moving the queen, because if Magnus would have moved the queen, say somewhere like e1 or d2, then all of a sudden he would be stepping into this knight pin. And if he would have played something like bishop e2, then Hikaru could have traded off, taken the pawn on c3, and created some weaknesses on Hikaru's pawn structure even earlier on, while not keeping the bishop pair for white.
You're making great points. So I didn't want to interrupt you, but the second game has begun.
Oh, thank you so much. Sorry, let's go to that second game. Forget this one. I'll let you explain the opening while I pull up the live game.
No, it's just that I'm usually the long-winded one. So then you were going on a very good, giving everybody some knowledge. And then I was like, wait, I should say something, but I don't want to interrupt. I don't want to be rude.
You should. Okay, I'm waiting for the live game to be updated, and that's when I'll pull it up. I don't see it there just yet.
Okay, so we have this position, which is highly theoretical. So today, the players are going down some opening theory. What's opening theory? It's well-researched, played many, many times. This position has certainly appeared thousands of times, and I would say probably hundreds of times at the absolute highest level for sure. And Queen e2 was the last move played by Hikaru. And you think, well, what does the queen on e2 do for you? Well, by moving the queen away, you free up the rook's access to d1. And why could that be important? Well, there's this pawn sticking out on d5, and you already have a bishop attacking that square. So you want to put your rook on d1 to increase the pressure on the pawn on d5. And we'll see what happens because it's about to get kind of complicated, I have a feeling. So I'll just, when the line happens, we can then explain in more detail. But essentially,
Rook d1 just played.
Rook d1 played. The essential point is that white can now play pawn to c4. And the reason you can play pawn to c4 is the pawn on d5 is pinned to the queen on d8. You do not want to give up your queen for a rook. And so c4 is a way to break open the position. And when you have a bishop, bishops need space. They need room to operate with on the diagonal. The bishop on b3 does hit the d5 pawn. But if I can play c4, then my bishop has even more room to work with, a new diagonal.
And c3 is also a common idea you see in these positions. But why not play c4? Because it does both of the purposes where it frees up your bishop, but it's also a little bit more aggressive, and that's what we saw Hikaru going for here. So bishop c4 cannot be taken because the queen on d8 would be under attack. So what can Magnus do? One thing that's a little bit annoying is it's not convenient for Magnus to get out of this pin because he'd have to move his queen to a worse square. If you move it onto b8, you're taking the square away from the rook that you want to go to. c8 or e8 are both pretty passive, and if you move something like queen d7 to connect your rooks, well, unfortunately, your queen is still on the pin here.
That's right. And, the pin is going to be annoying. Capturing on c4, not possible. So you have to figure out, how can I maneuver my pieces in a use of way bishop c5 played because it frees up the e7 square for the knight, also the diagonal for the queen. But the f2 pawn was under attack, which is why Hikaru plays bishop e3. And I want to give it a quick shout out if I can. I have Peter Docker's writing message. This is a line that was popularized by Paul Karras, and there will be some, chess real aficionados here, and Paul Karras' name they would recognize, a player from Estonia who's no longer alive, but was one of the best players in the world. And when you look at openings, you look at opening theory, it's because of players from the past who have really done all the legwork. They've researched these lines deeply. They spent a lot of time studying before engines were available. So that's pretty cool to see when players get lines named after them. It's actually a tremendous honor.
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Robert. So the bishops were just traded on e3 here. The white queen is quite a bit more active than Magnus is. And at this point, if Magnus wants to make any progress, I still don't love moving the queen away. What about something like knight e7 that defends the pawn an extra time? That'll make it a little bit easier for Magnus to move his queen away as well, since the pawn is currently attacked twice and protected twice. So if he moves away, he has to be careful to not lose the pawn. Maybe if he has some counter threats. So for example, if he plays queen b8 and he's also attacking the b2 pawn, that is somewhat interesting. But if he wants to move his queen onto e7 to get out of the pin, well, he cannot do that because the pawn on d5 would fall.
Yeah, this pawn on d5 and queen b8 was played because now if you take on d5, as you mentioned, the pawn on b2 is a big problem. So first trade, take your bishop away from the d5 square. Your rook has to come back up and take the bishop, and then queen takes b2, and your rook on a1 is trapped. So that black queen, which was falling victim to a pin before, now is the piece that's actually going to help black in a position like this. So Hikaru's not going to fall for that. Of course not. He's not going to take on d5. It looks like a free pawn. It isn't. It looks can be deceiving. Bishop b3, just retreating, blocking the queen's path to the b2 square. The bishop is no longer under attack. The pawn on b2 is no longer under attack. It's a multi-purpose move and one that was necessary to play.
Yeah, and now that the bishop is on b3, the queen on b8 looks a little bit misplaced. As we said before, the rook would rather be on b8 than the queen. So what about trying to trade off queens, something like queen a7 here? White's queen is more active, black's queen is not ideally placed, so why not trade them off?
And it's a good question. And I think if I were going to try to trade the queens, queen a7 is a good idea, but maybe queen b6 is a way that it's a little more advanced. So if the queen trade doesn't happen, my queen feels like it's on a better square, first and foremost. And if the queen trade does happen, for some reason I like this pawn on b6 rather than c7, because on c7, at some point, white will put a rook on the c file and start attacking this pawn. Whereas with the pawn on b6, it's much harder to get to.
Right, so this would give Magnus the option of kind of improving his pawn structure if the queens are traded, and if not, he can still put the rook on b8. And I imagine that Hikaru would not be interested in the trade here. And the other thing is, he wouldn't be interested on taking on b6 or having his queen taken on e3, because if the queen gets traded on e3, then he has to take back with the f-pawn, and all of a sudden he's going to have two weak doubled pawns here.
Yeah, it's funny. We tend to say trade, or like you're the one who takes the piece first if it benefits you, but neither way does it really benefit Hikaru's position. So I think that after queen b6, he might just move his queen out of the way and then try to play on with some attention. But knight a5 was chosen by Magnus because the bishop on b3 still can't move. Otherwise, you drop the pawn on b2, and you'll have to come up with a different move. And I think knight b to d2 is that move for Hikaru.
Yeah, knight b to d2. There's also knight to d4, but usually if you have one piece that hasn't moved yet and you're trying to get ahead of development, that is the intuitive move for you. And if you play knight b d2, the black knight recaptures, you can take back with your knight. Oh, actually, he went against what I said. He did play knight d4 still.
Well, you said it. He played it. That you're the Hikaru Nakamura whisperer right now.
I appreciate Hikaru making my suggestions look good in that case. So knight d4, it defends b3, it puts the knight on a nice central square. It's not quite an outpost because c5 ideas are possible in the future, and actually not just in the future. c5 is also possible now. But then there's knight takes c6, f takes c6, which you're bringing a side pawn closer towards the center. But if there's any way that Hikaru can provoke either D or c5 pawn to move forward, I guess it would be more the d pawn to move forward, because then e6 would be weak, because a pawn move like c4 actually would be pretty good for Magnus here because he'd have a long pawn chain.
Yeah, and part of this as well, in addition to attacking this bishop on e6, is you look at the knight on e4, count how many safe squares it has if it gets attacked. c5 is currently the only square that it can go to because the knight on d4 is in the way of the queen on e3. So if you play c5 and I take your bishop on e6, you take back with your pawn e6, and I play f3, you'll notice that no longer does your knight have any safe square to go to, which means that it's trapped in the center of the board.
Yeah. So I guess that would be the downside here, because otherwise Magnus's pawn structure looks very strong, but he has to. What would happen after f3 in that position? And
He's
actually,
going for it.
I see that this is being played.
Oh man, so we're getting into this variation, and that means that there's a move from Magnus that saves him. I think after f3, he'll play pawn to c4.
Yeah, and
say,
so this is exactly what's happening. So I think it's okay to keep analyzing it. So c4,
yeah, the point is that you take my knight, I take your bishop, and then we now have to evaluate who does that favor. I still like White's position when I look at it, but at least here Magnus isn't losing a knight because the bishop can't move. You'd like to move the bishop and then take the knight the next turn, but the pawn on b2 is still hanging behind the bishop.
True, but here, can't Hikaru take on d5 and create a passed pawn? That looks a little bit scary for Magnus to deal with. E takes d4, e takes d5.
Yeah, and then I think at some point, maybe right now, knight c4 will be played by Magnus just to attack the queen and then attack the pawn e5. So it's like you're liquidating, you're trading many pieces, and even if White goes up one pawn, you often feel like, all right, in an endgame, rooks, and knights, I can still hold that position, even if for the time being, I'm going to have to struggle a bit.
Right, and I'm just going to go back to show the current board, catch it up. Actually, the current board is exactly what we were talking about. So e takes d5 just played here. This is a complicated position. I think we both agree that we have a slight preference for Hikaru here, but it's still very complicated, and both sides have winning chances. So this is a very double-edged position just because of the lack of symmetry.
And this is exactly where you see the evaluation bars say like plus 0.45. It's essentially half a pawn better for White. But this is not the type of position where it's so clear that every single move for White keeps that advantage. No, there are some circumstances where, with your king being somewhat open, look at the f file, right? There's a rook on f8 aiming towards the king. If the queen has to move from e3, maybe I'll give you a check on the dark square diagonal, and then your king will be pushed into the corner. And White's pieces aren't fully developed because the knight on b1 and the rook on a1. So White is better objectively, but there are some practical things that you have to work out here, including some potential attack.
And Hikaru is also a lot better with the current time situation. He has over 16 minutes, which is, pretty important because he started with 15 minutes on the clock. So he has been playing so quickly that he's just been getting increment, while Magnus is under 9 minutes now. So that makes it seem like, once again, Magnus is the one struggling in the opening. And I think this is kind of new because in the first series of mini matches, it was Magnus who was dominating in the opening. And yesterday, even in the first game, it seemed like Magnus had a good opening, but then he made a mistake in the ending, which left Hikaru a way to come back and win a position that honestly had no business winning. But in this mini match so far, I've liked Hikaru's performance in the opening.
He's been extremely solid. In fact, throughout the first two games, he's really not had much of a disadvantage. There were some things in the first game that there was a hypothetical. If this happened, White would be better. But those things didn't happen because Hikaru played well. And here in the second game, he's playing a very strong opening variation where he's definitely not going to be worse. I just don't know if there's any chance for him to really be better here.
Right. So knight c4 played, the knight was under attack. C4 is a pretty good square for the knight because, any other option would have been quite passive, and at least that was attacking the queen as well as the pawn on b2. Now the pawn on e5 is hanging, so Hikaru is currently up a pawn, but Magnus should be able to recapture it. So let's say knight takes e5 is played here. Can Hikaru just start pushing that passed pawn? You see a passed pawn and it's intuitive for everybody to just push it. So what happens after d6?
Yeah, I'm glad you said d6, and I know that we're more experienced players than maybe people in the chat. Some people would just say, why not just take the pawn e6? Isn't that a free pawn? But when you look at knight takes e5, d takes e6, it's like, well, that pawn is an extra pawn, but how long am I going to be able to keep that for after, say, rook to e8, just attacking the pawn directly? It feels like it's easy for black to pile up pressure on it, and thus you'll regain it, restore material equality, and that's that. So d6, on the other hand, instead of capturing on e6, says, I care less about the material and more about, am I going to be able to just have this pawn be a thorn in your side? You're going to have to defend against it, and I have so many pieces already protecting it. So actually, queen b3 was played instead of knight takes e5 by Magnus, and knight c3 by Hikaru. And Hikaru still has way more time than he started with, and I'm starting to like his position more and more.
Yeah, and so queen b3 was attacking the rook on a2. Hikaru was able to defend it pretty quickly with knight c3 also developing. Now it's again Magnus's turn to move here. I wonder, he can't even play a move like rook d8 because the problem isn't d takes e6, as you mentioned, it is d6, because if you are going to have a pass pawn, you want it to be as supported as possible, and the win here wouldn't be to try to claim an extra pawn. You would win here because of your opponent having to just continuously defend against the pass pawn. So this position is starting to get pretty tricky for Magnus to play.
I think that Magnus didn't want to sit and try to prevent that pass pawn when talking the other variation. So he tried to take a more tactical approach to give himself a chance at equality here. But already you see that there's like this struggle on the d5 square. Do I take that pawn, or do I not even deal with it and try to get the b2 pawn? Because knight takes b2 right now looks like a good move, but then it's met by rook d1 to b1, pinning that knight so that it can't move away. And now we're looking at a potential endgame with pawns that are, for white, looking quite advanced, and for black, maybe you have some chances to hold that, and you definitely do, but it's just starting to look a little uncomfortable.
Right, and here Magnus wouldn't lose his knight because he does have a nice little tactical motive here. Queen c4, moving his queen away from this pin and offering the queen trade. If the queen takes, he takes back with the knight. But even in a position like this, I still really like white's chances here. So
yeah, the position you would take on e6 at the end of that, and then essentially you are going to have an
so you would take you would take on e6 in this position instead of pushing d6.
Because if I push d6 now, I just lose e5, and my nice protected pass pawn is no longer protected. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, so close.
Right, so you take on e6 instead, and if knight takes e5 here, then maybe even a move like rook b6, protecting e6, attacking a6.
Yeah, or knight d5, one of those type of moves where you're clearly making progress for white. You have an aggressive stance here, and black is just hoping that is enough to fend you off and be able to make a draw. But it's starting to look much more comfortable, much more simplistic to play from the white side.
And knight takes b2 was just played. Wow.
All right, well, if I trust anybody to have calculated 10, 15 moves ahead and assess that position accurately, it's Magnus. But this is going to be a position that Hikaru can really try to push here with no risk whatsoever.
Because I would, reply to that, well, if there's any position I trust somebody to, come back and push, that would be Hikaru playing against Magnus.
It's all forcing now.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to see the line that we just looked at. Of course, Magnus, best endgame player in the world. So I'm excited to see how he's going to fight to hold this position.
Not fun. I think he will succeed in holding it just because all of the actions taking place on one side of the board. I feel like that gives him better chances to make a draw in a position like this, because black is playing from the worst side of things. In pretty much every single line you can come up with, it's going to be a bit of a struggle for Magnus to just fend off a passed pawn that's coming. So even though material will be level, we talk about this a lot, it's about the quality of your pieces, not just the quantity of them.
Well, it should always be quality over quantity. No, I'm kidding. Let's go back to the game. Actually, I'm not kidding. It's true, but I derailed. So queen c4, is there any option where I was going to say Hikaru wants to keep the queens on the board to keep it more complicated? It seems like he thinks that this was the best move regardless. So we're going to see knight takes c4 here, and then d takes e6. So it's going to go into the variation that we discussed. And we still have the live board on, so you guys can see if anything is different. I'm going to play knight takes e5 here. So, Robert, you suggested knight d5. There's also rook ba1, which is kind of interesting. Is there an idea where Hikaru can go to just try to grab an extra pawn?
Yeah, why not? Actually, rook b to a1 is looking like a move that just goes right for it. But there must be something there for black. I have a hard time imagining, and maybe this is me giving too much credit to Magnus Carlsen because he is such an exceptional player that he's just going to lose a pawn and then suffer even more. Maybe the rook trade down the line actually helps his chances. He feels that way because now all of the action is just right there on the e6 square and then the remaining two pawns that white and black have over there. So I
I'm
guess
just
that's what
playing
he's
out
aiming
some of
for.
these boards to show that even if Hikaru is able to get that extra pawn, as you mentioned, all of the pieces are on the king side, and it's much easier to defend a position where you're down a pawn when it's all on one side of the board, just because the fact that you're down material and you have to move less actively across the board is in your advantage.
And actually, in that position, Alexandra, knight d3 at the end probably ensures that you're making a draw because knight d3 threatens knight c5, which forks the rook on a6 and the pawn e6. And you don't have a way to defend that pawn another time right now. And you say, well, let me take away your option of playing knight c5. I'll play rook c6.
Okay, I
That
thought you
way,
were going to say knight e4, but rook c6 works as well.
either move actually is. But rook c6 is going to say knight f4, and immediately I win the pawn, and then we can say, all right, we have the same pieces remaining. But your knight e4 move is probably better.
I like knight e4 because then I have g5 and c5 as a square for the knight to try to hold on to the pawn for a little longer. I know with your point it doesn't really matter because, well, I'm going to lose that pawn regardless, but it just seems a little trickier.
It certainly is trickier, and I think for the people watching it, it's good to show this because it does seem like white is holding on to that pawn, and with that extra pawn, there should be good winning chances, but the black king is going to help out very shortly to start attacking this pawn. And so, the evaluation bar, you can see it's trying to figure it out. Is this really a full pawn better for white? No, it's less than a full pawn, which means that black's chances of holding this game are really, really high.
Right. Okay, well, I'm going back to the live board. So knight takes c4, d takes e6. This is what has currently been played in the game, and Magnus likely to hold a draw here, but he has under 3 minutes to Hikaru's 15 minutes. That is a serious time difference. I mean, Hikaru, if he can find any type of plan that's a little bit trickier and try to play into getting Magnus in time pressure, that would be a nice plan. It's just so difficult to do here because we've seen so many trades.
And I mean, I'm mesmerized by the fact that Hikaru has more time than he started with.
Still, yeah.
We're move 26. And remember how Alexandra and I are always saying some opening theory goes 25 moves. Hikaru has clearly prepared this opening out to 20 plus moves, and the rest of the moves he played pretty quickly because he understands the position. But deep opening preparation by Hikaru to make it a position where only he can win, and rook f5 played by Magnus trying to take on e5 with the rook, and that way you can attack the pawn directly.
Okay, I like this idea. It's a little bit trickier than just taking with the knight right away. There's no way for Hikaru to protect it. It's attacked twice. At most, he could defend it once. So what ideas could he go for here? One thing I notice is that if the rook were on e5 and there were no rook on a8, then Hikaru can be like, yay, back rank checkmate, because the king cannot go to f7, is controlled by the pawn. So there is some ideas. Okay, I don't think it's going to work right away, but rook takes a6, rook takes a6, rook b8 if the rook is ever on e5.
So let's get that rook to e5. Your idea is perfect. Let's just execute it correctly. So let's start with knight to d5 for white, saying, all right, my knight's getting really active here. If you don't do anything, I'm gonna go knight e7 check and fork your king and your rook, or try to go knight to c7 and hit your rook on a8 and your pawn a6.
Oh, so I like this move a lot. This is a beautiful move.
You led me to it. Rook takes e5 for black, steals the pawn. Knight d5 was just played. Rook takes e5 played in response, and now your move rook takes a6 for sure is going to happen.
Yeah, because your rook cannot take. There's rook b8 checkmate, so Hikaru is grabbing another pawn, but instead Magnus is very likely to play rook e8, so now he is attacking the pawn on e6 twice, but you can defend it, not with rook b6 because of the knight, but with knight c7. And we're seeing these moves being played on the board, so they will catch up to the analysis board soon.
Knight c7 is such a frustrating square because it protects e6, it attacks your rook. Your rook cannot go up to e7, where it would go under normal circumstances, because rook e7 still allows that back rank checkmate. And this is really getting a little dicey here. But I guess after knight c7, you can bring your rook to c8. Same purpose, attacking the knight. But it's not like white can't just go and move a rook and defend it either. So I'm starting to like Hikaru's chances
Both
here.
rook c6 probably better than rook b7, just because it's also attacking the knight. So I'll put that on the board.
Yeah, and you're now you also have ideas where you move your knight out the way, even though your rook is not defended. Your rook is defended kind of tactically. So let's say black plays the move knight to e3 after rook to c6, then white can play knight to d5 because there's still this crazy back rank checkmate idea, and it's pretty awesome.
No, I really like it. So, I mean, whenever Magnus gets a chance to, I'm going to catch up the board to the live board. Whenever Magnus gets a chance to make some space for his king, a move like h6 would be very useful for him to have in this position, because if his pawn was already on h6, then he wouldn't have to worry about any of these back rank checkmate tactics. And knight c7, yay, we're predicting the move, Robert. Finally.
We are.
Finally.
We are, knight c7. And rook d8 chosen by Magnus, but is it just me or did that eval bar skyrocket?
Oh, that eval bar is getting really excited for Hikaru here. The eval bar is in his favor, as well as the time situation. Hikaru's up 10 minutes over Magnus.
And this is a moment where Hikaru is going to go into a bit of a thing because there's no reason to rush. He's up, 11 minutes on the clock, more or less. And so rook c6, okay, he's not going to think. He's just trying to use Magnus's time trouble against him. But that means that
or maybe
Hikaru
he's
sees
just thinking very quickly, Robert.
Yes, he's thinking, take 6 GG, yo. Right, chat?
Exactly.
Chat, right, chat? You see that? So rook c6 played here, attacking the knight on c4. And where's that knight going? Knight to e3. Then there's, oh my gosh, there's probably rook d6, just offering that rook exchange because you can't take me.
So annoying. That back rank is always there.
It's always there.
And okay, so what about something like rook c8, saying, okay, I'm not interested in that. Ooh, well, that pawn is very close to being pushed on e7. He can play rook d7 because you want your rook on the 7th rank regardless. You're defending your knight, and now you have e7 ideas.
That's right. And this pawn is starting to push forward, and the e8 square, the promotion square, is defended by that knight. And the rook on d7, you bring the other rook to b7, try to mow down the 7th rank and start attacking the king. You have so many options here for Hikaru, and Magnus has no time. I don't even know. Would you play knight a5 to attack the rook on c6? Perhaps.
Okay, so if you play knight a5, you can't play something. Yeah, you can't. Can you play rook d6 here as well?
You can. It looks like a great move.
Same idea, basically. You can't stop it. Okay, so rook c8 in this position as well, and
he chose knight e3.
Knight e3. Okay, cool. I'll catch us up there. So knight e3 instead. Rook d6. Gosh. This is what we predict. Okay, the eval bar is having the time of its life, plus 3, which is a full piece worth in value.
So after this game finishes, I have a point that I want to make, but I'll save it for later. But what I want to say is Hikaru chose a brilliant opening approach in this game. One where he was knowing that if Magnus showed perfect defense, Magnus can hold this game. Magnus is not showing perfect defense, and now with 20 seconds left, there's a rook on d7. This pawn is about to go to e7, and once that pawn reaches e7, it's just all over.
Sorry, I put the rook on e7. Yeah, the pawn is coming to e7. Magnus, less than 15 seconds on the clock, you guys. Okay, h6 makes sense. He's making space for his king here, but let's say e7. Can he play something like king f7 to try to fight it? No, he cannot, because e8 is actually almost checkmate. It's a double attack, a double check. Whenever it's a double check, you have to move your king. He cannot take the the queen on e8 because it's protected by the knight. So e7 played, king h7. We cannot promote just yet because the square is defended twice by the 2 rooks, and even though we would win material, we'd win an exchange. Hikaru wants much more material here in his position. So he plays rook e1. What a quiet move, Robert.
It's a great move. And the point is, I'm going to get a queen next. And at the end of that, once we trade everything on e8, it looks like black is a knight for rook.
I'm just going to make so actually, you guys, Carlson just resigned.
It's over.
I'm going to move h5 so that we can show the idea you just mentioned. So the threat here is to play e8. He's going to take with either rook. knight takes, rook takes, and now the problem is that this knight on e3 is pinned, so it cannot move anywhere. Rook d3 attacking the knight one more time, and he's going to be up a full rook in the endgame, which is an easy win. The score is now 1.5 for Hikaru Nakamura. 2 more games where Magnus is going to really have to try to push and come back. What an incredible result.
Wow. And I was just updating the score there. You see it 1.5 in Hikaru's favor. Huge victory there for your warlord, for Hikaru Nakamura. And I just want to point out there's this one decision in particular that I think led to Magnus's defeat. And if we go to move, where was it? When he went queen to b3, move 22 for black.
I'm there.
So queen b3 entered this variation where, black's pieces started becoming really uncomfortable. I see the chat going absolutely crazy. I mean, my periphery.
And they should. That was an incredible result.
Like my periphery, I see it all. Just everybody is going absolutely nuts. But the point was queen b3 here. This is a really critical moment where Magnus went for active defense. And it could have been a position where
instead of queen b3,
he should have just taken on e5 with the knight. And I know it doesn't look good. You and I were talking about this, Alexandra. D6 for white. Just instead of taking on e6, don't allow black such an easy plan here. The knight now is under attack. You probably bring your knight to d7. So it saves the knight. It blockades the passed pawn. But now Magnus is in a very passive position. And so he's just kind of sitting there knowing that white's better. It's frustrating. White's pieces are more active. You have a passed pawn. It's even material. But all of the kind of elements of the position favor white. Instead, after queen b3 and we got into this position, it just was uncomfortable for him very quickly. After knight c3, he decided to take on b2. But once the trade started happening, Hikaru's plan was very clear, and Magnus just had not enough time to calculate all the possibilities.
But that makes me think that the position was already difficult at this point because either option was hard for Magnus and he was already in time pressure. So you mentioned earlier that part of what Hikaru did well in this game was his opening choice, that he got a nice position, he made Magnus think. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
He had this prepared out. He was ready to get into this exact position where he felt he knew the plans better. He understood the dynamic of the position better. He probably knew that maybe knight takes e5 at this moment instead of queen b3 was better. But when Magnus isn't prepared for this opening, he has to figure this out all by himself. He doesn't have much time to begin with. And you get to this moment and Hikaru's playing instantly. So now you're scared. When your opponent's playing every single move, as soon as you make a move, they return their move. You're like, wait a second. Hold up. Am I doing the right thing? Am I getting into something that is already bad for me? The psychology of it is tough. And honestly, just huge props to Hikaru Nakamura.
Absolutely. So there are 2 more games left in this set of mini match, you guys. So Magnus has to win at least 1 game from those 2 to continue. I mean, if he wins more, then he would actually end up winning the mini match. But that's a lot of pressure on Magnus. He is going to have to play more aggressively or try to cause more asymmetry than he usually would, which might end up making him slip up even more.
Alexandra, I think we should just show the graphic we've been sent because Hikaru Nakamura played a perfect game.
Okay, hang on. I'm downloading it. All right, you guys.
My gosh.
So we just have the analysis here from chess.com, and if you can look at the accuracy, he played with a 99.5% accuracy.
Oh my gosh. And you see it's sudden, an even game ended by a blunder. That move there, I think queen b3 was one, maybe that move was okay, but it's clear that in the next few moves, it went south very quickly. And you see the how quickly that graphic, it just jumps up there at you. Perfect game by Hikaru Nakamura. And that's, by Magnus Carlsen. It's going to be a struggle now. Down 1.5 to half, just 2 games remaining. Magnus will have to return, serve here, and play a perfect game of his own if he's trying to take out Hikaru Nakamura.
That is true. I know we talked a little bit about the chances going into the game with Hikaru being the underdog, but moving forward here, what do you think the chances are that Magnus is able to come back?
Ooh. Hikaru is the heavy favorite, obviously, with 2 games left, with a 1-point lead. But if there's any player who can win a game of chess, it's Magnus Carlsen. Right?
Oh, I thought you were going to say it's Robert Hess, but that works as well.
No, it definitely wasn't going to say myself, but it's definitely Magnus Carlsen, right? So that's the thing is for Hikaru, he did this really well yesterday, where
Hmm.
he got out to a lead and he just played chess. He
Yeah.
wasn't really just like anticipating what Magnus is going to do. Magnus needs to win game three. He gets black in game four. If he's not winning game three, Hikaru is just going to go down some line to try to give Magnus absolutely no winning chances in the fourth game. So
Well, he
next
did a
game
great
is
job
all
at that
important.
yesterday, just holding nice, solid, drawn-ish positions. Not drawn-ish positions, but positions that are difficult for him to lose. So it does seem like it's very likely that he'll be able to do that again today.
He's going to try to park the bus. Just
Yeah.
bring all the defenders in front of his king, make sure that nothing's going to happen. But in this next game, I think it's important not to get into that mindset. Because if you try to play something, oh, it's just very solid. Magnus Carlsen's a grinder. The guy is playing these end games better than anybody in the history of chess. So if you just accept a worse position, you probably will be ground down. So let's explain the format just one more time. Just remind everybody that there are 4 games here.
All right, I just pulled up the format.
There are 4 games. Each game, same time control, 15 minutes with 10 seconds added per move. And if you score 2.5 points, you win the match, right? 2.5 out of 4, that's a winning margin. If it's tied 2-2, if Magnus is able to win one of these games and they draw the other, then we get to Armageddon, where Hikaru, as the higher seed, he finished in first place in the preliminary stage. He will choose, do I get the white pieces and 5 minutes on my clock, where I must win the game, or do I choose the black pieces and 4 minutes on my clock, where a draw equals victory? That is another tough decision that Hikaru is not bothering himself with just yet, because he has the lead and he wants to win this in regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. But that does just go to show that even if Magnus somehow is able to get an extra point here, the odds are still favoring Hikaru. So very heavy favorite at this point. But the games are going to be exciting. Magnus is getting the white pieces next, so he's going to be the one pushing for the win. If Hikaru can fend off and get a draw with the black pieces, and he gets white in the last game, things are looking amazing.
As a chess player, as somebody who commentates on pretty much every event that's going on, this is up there with the most excited I've ever been, because
Aww.
seriously, there's so many people watching. I want to give a shout out to everybody who's tuning in, and also the mods, because you're doing a great job here. And you're promoting chess. It's been growing. All the fans that are continue to tune in, extremely appreciative. Really, from the bottom of my heart, it's great to see the game of chess in so many new fans and people who are trying to learn to play the game. So thank you so much here. And we still have 2 games left, so I'm not going to get all sappy and leave on you, but I am sincerely appreciative of how much love you're showing the game of chess.
Absolutely. And next game, the critical game, Magnus with the white pieces. And also another shout out to Forzen, who has been watching these games. I think he's been watching every single day. He's been, trying to learn and guess the moves as well. So not just the viewers and the mods, but also the other streamers who have been supporting chess. Thanks so much for propping up our game here. I mean everybody's game, not our game, but we appreciate it.
Well, you can't spell the game without my last name, so it kind of is my game, right?
That's true, Robert. Thanks for propping up Robert's game.
Well, yeah, seriously, it's been awesome to see this, and I'm losing my words. Rare occasion here, but Alexandra, let me ask you. You always ask me the difficult questions. So you're Magnus Carlsen's coach. You're trying to figure out, what do I tell him as he goes forward down a point in this match? What do you say?
You have the white pieces in the next game. This is going to be where you're most likely to get your chances. So try to play something on the more complicated side. And I think that honestly, I'd be like, you're more qualified than I am. Do your thing, man.
I feel like, saying you're more qualified than I am, do your thing. Maybe not the best coaching advice.
I know. That's why I'm not coaching.
Whoa. You are a coach. Let's give you some full credit here. You are coaching at the PogChamps tournament, are you not? Brought to you by Chess.com and Twitch?
I am coaching the PogChamps tournament. Can you talk a little bit more about PogChamps?
Absolutely. Now that you're making me, if I must, I'll talk about PogChamps.
Yeah, I was asking you so that I could look if I can pull up the graphics.
Well, it's a tournament that's taking place, I believe, from June 5th to June 19th. And it's going to be between all of these streamers here. Hikaru Nakamura will be hosting it, and Alexandra, you will be coaching the players. And the players include some great names. I saw you coaching Nate Hill yesterday, right? That was pretty cool to see. He was picking up the game. So shout out to Nate.
His calculation skills were impressing me. I felt like he already knew so many principles of chess. He was getting way too many questions right. So I actually think, there's going to be some serious competition in this event.
Well, XQC is playing, Box is playing, Fusli is playing, Choco Bars is playing. I'm just going from memory here. I don't remember every single player.
Yeah, and we do have a command PogChamp, so you guys can see everybody who is actually playing in the event.
Is Forzen playing?
Yeah, I believe Forzen is playing as well. Although, let me confirm that.
Yeah, I don't want to, give out false information.
I thought he was, but maybe I also am thinking that. No, yeah, he is playing. He is playing. Okay.
Sweet. So that's why he's tuning in right now. Is that, we're going to give some tidbits, learn from Hikaru and Magnus. Speaking of learning from Hikaru and Magnus, hey, they're playing right now.
Okay.
Let's go to that game.
Let's go to that game. All right. I'm going to update the live board, and I'll let you talk about the opening while I do that.
All right. So we've arrived at a position where black is up a pawn. You see this pawn in c4. So Hikaru has an extra pawn, but white has better control of the center. You have two pawns, d4 and e4, right? You look at the two central lines, two pawns there for white, just one for black, the pawn e6. The bishop on c8 is not looking like the happiest bishop in the world. It's behind its own pawn, which means it will lack clear development and a clear diagonal to work with. So I typically like these positions. I feel more comfortable with them from the white side because I often feel like as black, I'm so tied down to protecting this extra pawn. Whereas for white, it's like about piece play. It's about harmony, coordination. And for black, it's like, I'm just keeping material. So I'm not the most materialistic chess player in the world, Alexandra. But how do you feel when you see a position like this?
Well, I'm a Queen's Gambit player myself, so I'm pretty comfortable in these kinds of positions where you have temporarily given up a pawn in exchange for piece activity. I think it's relatively straightforward to play with a side with piece activity, and I find it much more mentally difficult to play a position where your pieces are really cramped, and coming out with a strategy to develop is a little bit more complicated here. But one thing that Hikaru will be able to do to get space is put his knight on d5, which he did just do. If Magnus ever takes the knight back, he is going to bring the b6 knight into the center. And the big question for him is going to be, how does he develop that bishop on c8?
You know all about bad light square bishops. You play the French defense. It's an opening in chess where your bishop is always bad. So you feel more comfortable with that kind of bishop than I do. But
That's
maybe there are two different types of options that come to mind. One is just admitting that you'll be a bit cramped, but white will have to work to regain that pawn and play a move like bishop d7, which is a slower move. And this is the second idea that I was about to say, c5. Thematic, trying to gain space for your pieces. The reason I don't love the look of c5, I'm not saying it's a bad move, but the reason why I struggle with it is because if white just captures on c5, the black bishop on e7 will have to capture back because otherwise you sort of give a pawn away for no good reason. And then I go rook f1 to d1, where I pin this knight on d5. That coordination of white's pieces still feels like very obvious. And I'm not sure how black completes the development of the queenside bishop and the rook on a8.
Right. So d takes c5, bishop takes c5 was just played here. Oh man, because you would like to put your bishop on b7 if you could, but the knight on b6 is taking away the square for you to move your pawn forward. Another idea to open up your light squared bishop would be to move the e5 pawn, but you can't do that because e5 is overprotected by the white knight and the white bishop. So that is why Magnus can also play his knight on e5, and he's just saying, all right, you're never going to push that pawn forward. Does Magnus ever have to worry about a move like f6 kicking his knight out of here?
Well, the c4 pawn can be scooped up, and then you restore the material, and you just claim that, well, my minor pieces will be better. But I don't think Magnus... Yeah, he played rook f1 d1. And I want to point out why I said rook f1 to d1, and Magnus has just played it. It's because typically you put your rooks in the center. Rook a1 to d1, rook f1 to e1. So that way you control the central lines. Here is a position where you have lost your c4 pawn, but you're likely going to win it back. So I want my a1 rook actually to come to c1 and then take hold of this open file over here. So that's why rook f d1 came to my mind, and that's why Magnus played it.
Okay, so If it were Magnus's turn to move right now, what is his threat?
His threat, well, e4.
Exactly. So Hikaru has to take care of that. One thing he can do is just move his queen over. What about a move like queen e7?
Queen e7, very logical, escaping the pin. And then Magnus will just say, you know what? I see that you're trying to keep everything safe. Let me play knight to e4. I need to have some dynamic opportunities here. And knight e4, I want to take your dark square bishop because then you have to watch out for the remaining dark square. So any sort of imbalance here will help Magnus's winning chances as long as he's not, ceding anything himself. He's not making any concessions.
Yeah, this is a little bit intimidating. And going back to the live board after rook fd1, we saw Hikaru playing pretty quickly in the first two games. Now he's starting to sit a little bit more. This is certainly an opening that he is less happy about than the previous games.
Yeah, it's not fun to be on the side with less space because you have this pawn c4. It's an extra pawn. That's great. But it kind of keeps your knight on b6 stuck to the defense of that pawn. Whereas you made a very good point earlier, Alexandra, that you would probably want to have your bishop on b7, like b6, bishop b7. And all right, let's try to make that happen, but go through d7 to c6. You play bishop d7 here. Then the move you had suggested, knight e5, looks really strong. You just move your knight forward. You attack the bishop. You attack the pawn on c4. Maybe at some point soon I'll be able to push my e3 pawn to e4 to cause problems in the open d file. So all of White's moves just feel so easy to play. And as you see Hikaru start thinking here, it's because every single move for Black seems to have a drawback and a very easy response from White.
And why do you think this happened? Do you think Hikaru misplayed the opening a little bit? And if so, it's hard to pinpoint exactly where.
I wouldn't say that he necessarily misplayed the opening exactly, but the thing is, in general in chess, White has first move advantage. So pretty much any opening you play, you'll put an engine on, it'll say White has like a half pawn advantage or 3/10 of a pawn, whatever it may be. So you're trying to find a way to neutralize that edge. And Hikaru chose this line. Magnus first chose the line that he knows Hikaru is going to play because Hikaru plays this variation pretty much with both colors. You've seen it very regularly from him in recent weeks. But when he captured on c4, Hikaru went with that. That way he could free up his pieces and try to play ideas as we're seeing in the game with c5 and things like that. But I don't know. I've always felt that this type of dynamic is just so easy for the player with the white pieces.
And bishop d7 just played here, so we might potentially see the line we were just looking at with knight e5. And to go back to what you were saying about it being part of Hikaru's prep, if it is part of his prep, and as you mentioned, he plays it from both sides, then maybe even though it's uncomfortable and he needed a little bit of extra time to figure it out, he should likely still be able to at least hold.
Well, on the flip side of that psychology is that if you play something with both colors, you may start seeing some ghosts. You may start thinking that, wait, I played this from the white side, and I play from the white side for a reason because I think it's good for white. So then you should think, wait, am I doing the right strategy? Did I come up with the right response? Rook c8 here, played by Hikaru. I think that's a good move. His bishop on d7 isn't going to find an active diagonal just yet. So please take me on d7. Your knight e5 is very active. I would love to trade that one off for my bishop that's not doing too much.
Right. So let's say that Magnus makes a quiet move, something like rook ac1. That knight on e5 is so annoying. I'm tempted to make kind of an opening no-no and play f6 here.
Yeah, f6 is an option, but when you play f6, what happens after knight takes bishop on d7?
So the question is, do I take back with the knight or do I take back with the queen, right?
And both have their drawbacks because you take back with the knight on d7. I then go take your knight on d5.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the pawn on c4.
But I'll do that after.
After you take the knight, then you take. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so if we take with the knight, knight takes d5, e takes d5, and I mean here actually you could just capture the rook on d5. So this looks pretty bad for Hikaru. What if I take with the queen instead so that I have an extra defender on the d5 knight?
And then I'm wondering if e4 works because the knight looks pinned to the queen. But this is why I always emphasize the difference between an absolute pin which
Mm-hmm.
is when there's a king behind it and the piece can't move, or a relative pin when a more valuable piece is behind. So it's a relative pin, so the knight can move, and it should move to b4 after e4. So you take my queen, I take yours, but that rook on d7 will then go scoop up the pawn on b7 after that, and it's looking promising for white.
Yeah, rook takes b7. Then black has to also, get his knight out of here. Knight d4 looks like a good option because you're putting a threat on the bishop on e2 as well. But as you mentioned, Magnus would be the one with the more active rook in this position. But this would still be complicated. I'm not really sure what to make of this. And Magnus is still thinking, actually, so we don't have a move from him yet. So we can keep going on this line, or we can go back and suggest something other than f6.
So I just want to keep that position on the board. So you can look at the live board beneath myself and Alexandra, right?
Mm-hmm.
Underneath us, between the two players' faces, is the live position. And if you look at the huge difference between the live position and the one that we've been analyzing,
Yeah,
it is super hard not just to see this variation without moving the piece on the board, but not only you're seeing it, you have to evaluate it properly. In my head, when I'm looking at a position, and I can see it with my eyes, but if I just looked at my head, I say, no, I don't like this for black. White has a rook on the 7th rank. Now my pawns on the queen side are split. White has 2 bishops. That doesn't seem like it's a good trade-off for black. And so maybe it's okay. And the engine, as I see on the screen over there, the evaluation says only 0.2 of a pawn better for white. It's hard to go into a line like that unless you are absolutely certain of the consequences.
right. And this is a tricky position to evaluate, even if you have it set up on the current position. So even more difficult from where it is set up right now. But now Magnus is starting to think as well, which is somewhat comforting for Hikaru, since he's been the one doing most of the time sink in this opening. The clocks are now equal. I wonder, so we suggested a slow move, but does Hikaru have any more tactical ideas in this position here?
Well, Hikaru's name has changed on chess.com there.
Oh, wow. Chess.com, a site of the people. I see how it is.
Well, trying to free the people and also free the pieces. That exactly is Hikaru's strategy in this position. And Magnus, for the first time, has dropped under 15 minutes in this game. You started with 15 minutes. You gain 10 seconds per move.
Sorry, the clock was not updated before, which is why I thought it was even. But now I see that you're right. He is at 15 minutes. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. And so Magnus giving this position some pause. It is a decision where he needs to figure out not just this current move, but we were just analyzing that variation where the queens got traded, the rook was in the 7th rank. He's looking at all that. He's like, does that optimize my winning chances? And if not, let me avoid the queen trade. Let me play bishop f3 here. I'm getting rid of my attack on the c4 pawn, but putting my bishop to attack your knight on d5. Or the move that you had suggested earlier, rook a to c1, that also looks plenty good. So he plays rook a to c1. I really thought that was the best move, but we'll see if Hikaru plays your move f6 and feels comfortable about all these trades.
Okay, now the clock is at 10 minutes again. I'm just going to check a secondary source to see where the clock is.
It's 10 minutes.
Actually. Okay.
It's 10 and a half minutes.
Okay, so yes, the clocks are at 10 minutes. The clock is pretty similar.
Yeah,
okay.
the relay was just a little, what's the word I'm looking for? I was say bonkers. Wonky. There's the word.
Wonky.
I knew it
Bonkers.
sounded like...
They both work, Robert.
Yeah, so there was just a relay thing going on there, but we got it. The situations got even on the clock, so I misspoke earlier just because the clocks were not up to speed. And your move f6 feels like the one that relieves the pressure as quickly as possible, which probably is nice for Hikaru, but there is definitely a risk in playing f6.
Okay, but let's say he doesn't play f6. Does a move like queen e7 do anything here, or is there something he has to be concerned about? So I guess the question is, what is the threat? I guess if the question is what is the threat, I should make a move like h6 instead, and then we can look at this position as if it were Magnus getting an extra turn here.
Well, after any kind of h6 or sort of random move, then this knight takes d7 line we've been talking about, where we think the queen has to take back on d7, as the knight on d5 otherwise would be captured and you lose a pawn.
Mm-hmm.
These lines with knight takes d7, queen takes d7, pawn e4 on the pinned knight, you have to kind of calculate what little move helps black or hurts black when we start trading these queens off.
Right.
And I actually think that having the pawn on f6 just to keep that position that you're going through right now.
Yeah.
The difference is there's a pawn on h6 rather than earlier the pawn f6. But if that pawn was on f6, the rook could go to f7 at the end of these variations and fend off the 7th rank. So now
so
the rook
you
on
prefer
b7,
having a pawn on f6 because it gives space for your rook.
exactly. You can defend your entire 7th rank where that white rook on b7 looks so strong. But if I can trade off your best piece for my rook on f8 that hasn't been doing much of anything, that's a good trade for black and also helps protect some of your weak pawns on the queen side.
And that's a very good point. And that's one thing that grandmasters are able to do very well, which is understand small differences in variations. Because, you know, to us normies over here, we have what's the difference between having a pawn on h6 and a pawn on f6? This position looks very similar. But at this level where any small inaccuracy counts, they want to optimize as much as possible to get their best shot at the game.
Well, all you really need is to put on a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle shirt, and then, I'm going to get you a shirt.
Please do, and then we can wear matching t-shirts.
Oh my God, we'll be matching!
Yes,
this would be amazing.
Ninja. No, I mean, my wardrobe is really boring. I mostly just have like plain colored tops because I don't like to think of a wardrobe too much, you know?
You think I really thought about my wardrobe? I picked up a graphic tee.
You've had it for the last like 20 years, Robert. I mean,
at least.
Clearly you don't go shopping. You know?
I think this was given to me on the day I was born. Just like I was given this Curious George the day I was born. So I think this came with that.
Oh, man. No, you guys, I'm just saying that for people who haven't spent so many hours playing chess, this is hard to understand. And I mean, I always think that chess is a game where you just need to put practice in, and with time, anybody could be good at it. I don't know if you agree with that, Robert.
I definitely agree that you can improve. I guess be good at it is a relative term.
I'm not saying world champion. Definitely there's talent at the highest levels. But,
right.
If you put in a lot of time, anybody could get... What would be good for you?
No, I think that people certainly can improve, and otherwise I wouldn't do the chess coverage and commentary that I do if I didn't firmly believe that. I say it every time I do a show that, if you just want to watch to have fun and not learn, that's fine. That's cool. But I think that everybody can leave with at least a nugget of knowledge and benefit from that experience. And that's what we're here for, to talk about things like, does moving the H pawn or moving the F pawn make a difference? And you can see why it does based on what we're explaining. And just, I think you can take that away and apply it to your own game. But as just the reason why I paused for a second there was because these players, Hikaru and Magnus, have been studying chess their entire life. They've been training so hard. And then I also want to say, like, I'm not there. I know that. And so it just shows just how good they are. It's not just something that you one day you pick up the pieces and then you're a
grandmaster. Of course.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Hikaru is taking his time here, so he's under 7 minutes. He is very likely just looking through the differences in that long exchange line. And by I mean like lots of exchanges. And he goes for knight b4 right away instead.
And he spent, 5 minutes on this move? And it just goes to show that he probably didn't like something in that variation. Likely it was the activity of white's pieces. So he goes knight to b4. So now the queen really is under attack. And it's another tough decision this time for Magnus. Do I get active with my queen by bringing my queen to e4? Or do I just sit my queen back on b1 and let the other pieces take care of the position? Because my knight may want to go to e4. We talked about ideas like that earlier, where the knight from c3 goes to e4. And of course, pieces can't share the same square. So that's what I'm trying to figure out right now. Queen e4 feels more natural to me. It's a more aggressive stance for the queen. But I would also understand if Magnus just drops the queen back and says, my position still looks really good with my rook on d1, pinning your bishop on d7 to your queen on d8.
Well, I'm going to look a little bit at the position with queen e4 because this looks like a very nice position for white. We are putting pressure on b7. The rook is still pinning the bishop to the queen. Black's pieces still feel pretty clumsy here with the knight on b4. That is not the optimal space for the knight, and we just had to move it from the center. We have a bad pawn on d7. I don't see how Hikaru improves this position.
And I love that you called it a bad pawn on d7 because I was going to make fun of that bishop and you did it for me.
I did it without even thinking.
You're just lobbing one up to me and I just got to hit the home run.
No, you did it. You did it, Robert. So I mean, tough question, but what kind of ideas can Hikaru go for here to try and uncramp his position?
After queen, maybe just bring the knight back to d5. I don't like that move, but I don't see another way to protect my pawn on b7, because if I ever move my knight from b6, which is the more natural move in a sense to advance that other knight, then the c4 pawn loses defender. So that's why I think knight b4 back to d5. It may be a hard move psychologically to play. Just move your piece forward, now moving it right back, but it may be a necessary move.
Yeah, Hikaru is on the defensive here, and repeating moves is fine for him because Magnus is the one who's going to have to switch something here. But what is the difference then? Because if Magnus is repeating this position, previously his queen was on c2, now his queen is on e4. That seems like a better space for his queen because he's putting an extra attack on c4. So isn't this position just slightly worse than the previous one?
It is, except for the fact that white no longer has e3 to e4 to kick the knight from d5. So you're filling the square, and queen e4 was played, and you're taking away from the pawn on e3 as well as from the knight on c3. Honestly, all of white's pieces want to share that square.
Right. It's one square and three pieces, so it's a hard time deciding which one to put on e4.
And look how quickly Hikaru responded to queen e4, bringing the knight right back.
Yep. So you guys, this did happen in the game. Queen e4, and Hikaru repeated the position. So queen f3 makes a lot of sense. We're talking about wanting to get control over that d4 square. So now there's not going to be any knight b4 at the end of that long variation we were looking at attacking the queen. And now white is going to be able to do something with a pawn on e4.
Yes, and whether it's the pawn or the knight, there's just so much pressure here. Knight takes d7 now is a very real threat because let's say you make a move like h6 for black, just to show this variation.
Sure.
Then after knight takes d7, queen takes d7, we have e4, because in those other lines, the black knight was attacking the queen, but with the queen on f3, there's nowhere for that knight to move to attack the queen, so you simply are losing your knight in the process.
Exactly. So what happened?
Look at the move that was just played, bishop a4.
Okay, so that feels strange because it's going to remove the knight away from the defending of c4. I understand that that bishop was, a very poor piece, so he'd be happy to trade it off. But another thing that does is it creates a direct pin on the knight. So there's no more piece in front on d7 What happens after e4?
He's going to try to take a bunch of pawns by going knight takes b2. But this doesn't look good for black, and I see the evaluation bar is going up. And the reason why Hikaru did this, it's what we've been saying. It's what Magnus did in the last game. Instead of defending a bit more passively, you go for the active approach, saying, I know my position is going to collapse on some area of the board, so let me get something in the process. I'm going to take your pawn on b2, and then I gain a second pawn, maybe even a third. And here at e4 played by Magnus very quickly, understanding that this pin is devastating. And after knight takes b2, the question becomes, do I move my rook or do I just take your knight on d5? And if the position blows open, the minor pieces and the queen are going to be extremely strong.
Right. So maybe we can take a look at both of those. So rook d2 seems somewhat intuitive because you're moving your rook away, but you still have that same pin on d5. The issue with this is that you have c3 here. I think you have c3. Does rook take c3 work here since the knight is pinned? What the heck is going on here?
I don't think it works because after rook takes c3, you can just take that rook on c3 with your knight. And I know you're losing your queen, but I'm going to get an intermediate move after rook takes d8. I'm going to take your bishop on e2 with check. So that way I save my knight from just being lost over here. You take back on e2 with your queen, and then I take your rook on d8. My knight, it's tempting to steal that knight on b2, but if you do it, you're going to get ice skater. That's what they call it, right?
Yeah, the ice skater, the back rank checkmate.
Okay, just making sure that I'm up with the latest Twitch lingo.
No, you're nailing it. You're nailing it. Okay, so that might not work. Did this just happen? Yeah, it did. Okay, so knight takes b2, e takes d5. He decides for Hikaru takes the rook on d1, and now it's Magnus's turn to think here. I mean, rook takes d1 seems super intuitive. Just capture that knight back. Maybe he thinks there's something tricky. No, okay, he just played rook takes d1.
Yeah, rook takes d1 is, look at this. So let's do material count. Black has 7 pawns, White has 5 pawns, so 2 extra pawns for black.
Mm-hmm.
White has one rook, black has 2. That's 1 extra rook and a rook and 2 pawns. But white has 3 minor pieces, 2 bishops and a knight versus just 1 bishop. So what I'm getting at is white has a light square bishop and a knight for a rook and 2 pawns. That trade-off by just pure material, that's about 7 points for the rook and 2 pawns in terms of kind of like how you're taught chess, versus a bishop and a knight, collectively about 7. They say 3 each, but depending on the position, they can be worth more or less. Let's call it about 7 to 7. A rook and 2 pawns versus 2 minor pieces. Let's call that about even. But the problem is the rooks need open space to work with to feel really good and useful. Here, it's the bishop and the knight that are about to team up and hurt the black king, because the pawn on c4 is already under attack. If white were to get a free move, not only would I consider bishop takes c4, and actually bishop
takes d5 just played.
Yep. So bishop takes c4 possible now, even though you took the pawn d5, because the pawn is pinned to your queen on d8.
Yeah, bishop takes d4 looks like a great move here. Also, rook takes d5 could also work since both pawns are hanging here.
Looks great.
I mean, he has 2 good options. So the material count, as you mentioned, actually it's going to turn even soon because Magnus is going to win both of these 2 center pawns. But qualitatively, Magnus has the better pieces. You always prefer to have the side with 2 minor pieces versus a rook and a pawn.
Oof. This is the bounce back game that Magnus needed and the one that Hikaru wanted to avoid. But it's credit to both players. Essentially, they're just having, honestly, little role reversals. Hikaru did this to Magnus in game 2. Now Magnus doing it to Hikaru in game 3. And this is why we have such an even match between these 2 superstars.
Yeah, they're both extremely talented and insane players in the way they've just been going at it today, winning positions. I mean, this one just felt like Hikaru got kind of outplayed out of the opening. Is that fair to say? Or was it just a tricky opening?
It was just the discomfort. It just added up. You get the aggregation there, accumulation of like, oh, this position doesn't look good for me, so let me make this move. Oh, but this other position doesn't really look good for me. F it. I got to do something. So let me go bishop a4. But unfortunately, his position collapsed very quickly after that. And here in the live position, bishop takes d5 for white. Look at this knight on e5, this bishop on d5. So nicely placed in the center. The pawn f7 is under attack. The pawn on b7 is under attack. And a great line here is after bishop takes d5 for white, if black tries to go rook c8 to d8, white can just go ahead and play bishop takes f7 check. A really nice move, just saying your rook on f8 is overworked, and so is your queen on e7. You're both tied to the d8 square and the f7 square. So after bishop f7, rook f7, I have rook takes d8 check. And once
say that variation again, because I was on the current live board after bishop d6.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking instead of bishop d6, if rook d8 were to be played.
Got it.
And then your bishop takes f7.
Right. So if you move the f rook to d8, then we're just hanging on f7. And if you move the c rook to d8, actually, that still works. Right.
Yeah, that's what I was explaining. The rook and queen for black are overworked there because you're all tied down to the f7 square. So when I take you on d8, I'm distracting your pieces.
Yep. And I put that on the live board now. So that is why this variation didn't work. Whoa. Hang on. This is not our analysis board. So bishop takes d5, bishop d6 just played, and bishop takes f7. This is a free pawn here that Magnus is capturing. And I mean, Hikaru wants to keep as many pieces on the board as possible. So he plays king h8. He's not going to try to trade off, but that would also just give his opponent another exchange up. But this looks terrifying. Queen h5 with the threat of knight g6.
That looks good. Queen h5. The one thing that black is going to try to do is take this knight on e5 to win the bishop on f7. But you have a critical intermediate move after queen h5, bishop takes knight, bishop g6, threatening checkmate on h7. The pawn is pinned on h7 to the king on h8. And once I brought my bishop to safety and you play h6, the only move you can play to stop the checkmate, then I'm able to just steal your bishop back on e5. The 2 bishops are so powerful, landing a brutal attack.
Man, this is so tough. And yeah, a reminder, you guys, the live board is always underneath us, just in case you want to make sure that, hey, is this a live board? Is this analysis? Oh, this looks really bad. I mean, I don't see how Hikaru is going to come back from this. It looks like the score is going to be tied up. And also, thank you for everybody who's been subscribing. Rezagrat's last sub. Sorry if I missed it because we've been so focused on the commentary. I will shout you guys out when I'm only live on my channel later.
Yes, and so many people watching this match right now. I don't know what the total number is, but I see
over 33,000 on Hikaru's channel. The line that we just talked about is playing out.
Oof. Queen h5. Yeah, there's nothing you can do because knight g6 is not just a threat with a check, but that's actually checkmate if white were to get a free move.
Bishop takes e5. Okay, and now we're going to continue seeing this. And apparently there's over 50,000 viewers on all of the channels who are looking at this event. As we mentioned, Forzen was always also watching. So that's just insane. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I know this is super exciting.
It's funny how one little word there changes the meaning completely. Like Forzen was also watching versus always watching. Always watching feels like a little creepy. Oh, he's always watching me. But then it's like, also watching.
Somebody's watching me. And
I love how I got you to sing.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I keep thinking if, at some point you're going to have to tune in because your voice is much better than mine.
You sound pretty good there.
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate it. So Queen G5 instead of taking the bishop. I mean, Hikaru is trying to keep up the complications. The only issues after Queen takes, Pawn takes, there's just too much going on for Magnus here. So he's only worth 1 point up in value because he has 2 bishops for a rook. So 6 points versus 5. But Hikaru also has these weak pawns. His king is in serious danger of getting checkmated. And the bishop pair is just much stronger than a rook. More so than even the quantitative value.
And what you're sort of hinting at is that black would like to trade the queens and 1 pair of rooks because you look at bishops of opposite color. The problem is they cannot team up on a square. But if you have a bishop and a rook, that's 2 pieces attacking a square, and 1 rook is defending it, that's a problem. So
right.
That's
so
why...
let me just try to make an example of this. So chat, I mean, pretend we're not getting back rank checkmated. So let's say rook d7. The idea is that you could be putting pressure on a pawn twice, whereas if the rooks are off the board, the most you can ever attack a square with is 1 piece.
That's right. So that's why black would look to trade off 1 pair of rooks, and then even though you'll be worse for the rest of the game because the bishops are so strong, and that's a little deeper into the position, but that's what you're aiming for. But unfortunately here, if you just take on g5 for white and Hikaru takes back on g5, white will play h4, just making sure there's no ice skater happening anytime soon, and then you'll try to checkmate the black king very quickly.
Right. I mean, let's just give an example there. Say you play something like g takes h4, then you can go for rook d7 or rook d4. Honestly, they both look pretty terrifying. I can't even, I'm having a hard time picking between 2 good options here.
And h4 was played by Magnus after the queen trade. And yeah, I would not be surprised to see a resignation in a few moves just because the bishops and the pawns and the king being unsafe for black, it's overwhelming.
Oof. So score is going to be 1.5, 1.5. One good thing for Hikaru is that he has the white pieces in the final game. And even if that game ends up being a draw, he does get to pick which color he gets in Armageddon. That being said, with this new result here, who do you think is the favorite?
Well, Hikaru gets white in the final game, right? So that's, of course, good for him. Then he gets to choose the color he wants in the Armageddon. So I would still say that Hikaru is the slight favorite going forward in this match, but it's just about as close to a toss-up as you could possibly imagine.
And some people are asking what Armageddon is. So if the mini match, which is a series of 4 games, is tied, so 2-2, let's say that Magnus wins this one and they draw the next one, then there has to be some way to get a tiebreaker so that, Hikaru and Magnus don't just keep drawing and playing forever until, the first man quits, although that would be pretty entertaining.
We've seen that before, and it was not healthy for Anatoly Karpov.
No, you're right. And that's why they had to change the regulations to the World Championship. So what happens is it's going to go to a game where there's no way to draw. The way that works is white side gets 5 minutes, black side gets 4 minutes, but if the game is a draw, then it's considered a win for black.
And it's tough to know how valuable is that minute. It really differs from player to player. Yu Yangyi, earlier in this tournament against Ding Liren, he chose the white pieces 2 different times. and Hikaru chose the black pieces against Levon Aronian, right?
Mm-hmm.
So different players prefer to play either for the win with the extra minute or just say, I just need a draw that's a more likely result if I can make sure that I don't get in trouble on the clock. And this game still going here. Hikaru doing his best to prolong it. But now the issue is I would just probably put bishop to e7, keep the rook on a5 tied to the pawn on g5. And this black king.
I think we just saw bishop b2, rook takes a2, rook d2, and king g8. Some fast moves here.
So what is the plan? Just move the bishop on g6 to b1, I guess. And that way, if I play bishop to b1, I'm kicking your rook away from my bishop on b2, and my next move will be rook to d7.
And that is really important because there will be no way for black to defend that pawn. And then once he's able to get rid of g7, all of a sudden h5 is a pass pawn, which is just another terrifying thing that Hikaru will have to deal with in this situation. But going back to our discussion, it seems like this was the worst opening Hikaru's gotten so far. Do you think that might make him worried to pick the black side of the pieces that he usually does in Armageddon?
That's another good question, because this opening that we saw in this game is exactly the type of position you want in Armageddon, because you need to win with the white pieces. And so you make black think at every turn, and that 1 minute advantage quickly becomes 45 seconds. Then it becomes 30 seconds. Then it becomes, down to zero. We are playing even on the clock and the top position on the board. So I think that Hikaru will need to figure out an opening that he feels as comfortable with as possible. And I don't think it was the one we just saw.
Right, because it seemed like his best chance was that f6 move, which I'll just go back to here instead of when he played knight b4. But that also seemed like it was going to be a tricky position. I'm not sure even if he would have played that he would have been able to hold. So here, if he would have moved f6 and gone into that long line that we looked at.
Yeah, it's easy if you have the engine saying that it seems this way, but again, you get the engine evaluation for that move, and then you have to figure out what about these 8 other possibilities? How does that impact the position? We get to the live board here. I mean, this king on h7 is not a very happy piece.
No, not at all. What could Hikaru... I think Hikaru is just playing on a little bit longer despite knowing he's lost, because often players do that when they're still reflecting on the game and what happened, and it just feels a little bit easier than resigning right away.
And if you're just playing moves and you already know that the game is essentially over, it actually gives you some time to recover, even more time, because you've been playing knowing that this is going to be a 0 on the score sheet for you. So it's going to be a tied match, but you're just playing this so that in addition to the break to get between games, you're just getting rid of this, thinking about what happened, coming up with a strategy for the next game. So I actually think that with that in mind, it may be a good idea for Hikaru to let someone play out a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's fair, because they probably still get the same amount of break time regardless of when they finish, right?
Yeah, I think it's 5 minutes or so between the games.
Got it. So he's kind of, prolonging his break time a little bit here, which I think is important so that he can, take a little bit of a psychological break between the loss. And actually, even though he has the white pieces in the next game, do you think it's worse to have to play right after a loss, even if you have the white pieces?
It's never fun to lose, right?
Right.
0% of the time is it fun to lose, but I mean, he has the white pieces. There may be some. He's about to get checkmated, king h2. Now the threat is pawn g3 checkmate.
Oh man, and the only thing, I mean, Hikaru can play g3 and prolong it, which is what he's doing. But you know what? I'm not even gonna say it. I'll let it play out on the board. Enjoy, you guys.
Yes, I think Magnus knows how to deliver checkmate from here.
Yeah. Oh,
that was a free
it's funny actually, because the engine saw checkmate and Magnus didn't go for the checkmate. He just went for the material exchange, because when you're winning by this much, it doesn't really matter. So yeah, Hikaru just resigned.
And I'm going to update the scoreboard. So now it is 1.5, 1.5. Hikaru resigned once he lost that rook there, and that means we have a tied match. And Alexandra, I believe we have a graphic to show. We just got one for what the Armageddon will entail if this next game is a draw.
All right, I am pulling it up, Robert. Here we go. So, the Armageddon is going to be a one-off tiebreak game in which the player with white pieces has 5 minutes and the player with black pieces has 4 minutes and draw odds. There is no increment in an Armageddon game, which is really important because having 1 minute extra if you have 10-second increment is not as big of a deal as whether there's no increment and you can try to flag your opponent, which means force them to run out of time.
And well, let me ask you, you always put me on the spot. In an Armageddon situation, you're Hikaru Nakamura. You get to choose which color you have. Do you feel like Hikaru or Magnus is the favorite in the Armageddon?
Who do I think? I think if there were just one game left, or 2 games left, I mean, Magnus was the favorite going into this match, right? So you would think that Magnus would be the favorite if it goes into Armageddon, except for the fact that Hikaru gets to pick, but I just don't think the choice is that clear for him.
Well, the reason I ask this is because Hikaru has white in the last game. Does he just say, I'm going to play a pretty level game, take 0 risks, and if we make a draw, I feel comfortable heading into the Armageddon? Or does Hikaru feel nervous about a potential Armageddon, in which case he plays a little bit more edgy chess and then tries to win in regulation?
I don't think it's clear. I think he should just try to play his best chess instead of. I think it's worse when you're trying to play for a particular result than when you're trying to play just the most accurate moves. So I think he shouldn't even think about that.
And we all say that to ourselves. We shouldn't think about the result. I say it all the time. You say it all the time. But let's be real. It is pretty difficult, right?
Yeah, of course it is. And that's why I really like commentating and being able to watch. And, very, very few people in the world could do what they're doing right now. I mean, if any, it's like, actually, no, they're the only people who can do it. Yes, even more impressive.
I'm trying to figure this out. Honestly, I'm going through all of the iterations here, thinking, does Hikaru want to challenge Magnus? I think he does. I think that Hikaru, based on his second game when he had the white pieces, he'll do something like that, where if Magnus finds all the accurate moves, then Magnus can maybe hold the balance and the point will be split. But I don't think Hikaru would be well advised to take it to Magnus and say, I just lost this game. I want to play something aggressive and try to go for a position where I'm living on the edge, where it may be good for me for the time being, but one little mistake there and the position switches into Magnus's favor. So I do think we'll see some similarities to the second game. And then if we get to Armageddon, Hikaru Nakamura is the most experienced player online ever.
So you think he might actually be a favorite?
I think so.
Wow.
In a match situation, Magnus Carlsen is the favorite. In a one-game Armageddon, where we're talking about pure mouse speed, just quick calculation. These are you couldn't ask for a better pairing, of course, but I would take the black piece if I were Hikaru. I would take that extra minute and I would put pressure on the clock. I would just move really quickly, say, Magnus, you have 4 minutes.
Wait, you would take the black pieces, that would be a minute less, right?
A minute less, play very quickly, try to take that time disadvantage, squeeze it. Hopefully that it becomes, instead of 1 minute, comes 30 seconds, and force Magnus to beat you on the board because Hikaru is so fast. We've seen him win the Speed Chess Championship multiple times. We saw Magnus Carlsen win the Speed Chess Championship before that against Hikaru Nakamura. So in a single blitz game, though, anything can happen.
That's true. And I see somebody asking a good question. What is the etiquette for flagging? I mean, flagging is part of the game. When there is no increment, both players are going to be trying to do it, and there should be no hard feelings if one player tries to flag the other, as in it's not bad etiquette at all. It's just playing their best game.
Oh, man. I'm excited.
Oh, I'm excited as well, you guys. There's going to be one more game in the 15 minutes plus 10-second time control. If either player wins, that is a decisive result, and they move on to the finals. If it is a draw, it's going to go into Armageddon, which is going to be super, super exciting either way.
Yeah, and I just want the game to begin. Honestly, it's like we're getting the suspense here, and I'm just waiting like an eager schoolboy, just like, when is the movie going to start? When is it going to start? And I just want it to take place right here, right now.
Yeah, and I am seeing the messages that you are seeing as well, And those are some interesting tidbits of information, which I
Which
think. Never mind. I'm sorry, I choked up. I'm not sure. Okay, so they have a 5 minute break. The games are starting in a few minutes.
yes, they will. And I'm just trying to gather my thoughts here because my mind is jumbled. It's all over the place. I'm, I just can't tell if I really think that Hikaru is the favorite, and I don't want to put undue pressure on the guy. He can't hear me, so it's not like.
Yeah,
Uh,
at least he won't know right now.
but you have to think about it. He has the white pieces in the next game, so you can't imagine that his odds are worse in that single game. And then he gets to choose the color in the Armageddon, and he's has a lot of experience playing online chess, as is Magnus. But if he gets the choice, he's going to pick what he believes benefits him. And so, like all things considered, I have to give the slight nod to Hikaru here.
Yeah, that is actually pretty fair. And I'm getting another question of why Hikaru gets to pick the Armageddon color, because doesn't Magnus have more match points overall, which is true, but that is not how it is determined. So when they were qualifying for the semifinals, it was Hikaru who was actually the top ranked seed when they were playing against. How many players were there before? I think there were 12.
There were 12 to start with. The top 8 made it to the knockout bracket. And now we're left with, well, I would say 4, but Ding Liren was eliminated yesterday by Daniil Dubov. So we're left with these 2 in their semifinal, and then Daniil Dubov awaits the winner.
Yeah, exactly. So that is why Hikaru is going to get the draws. And there's actually no advantage for having more game points in this. It's just who wins each set of mini matches, just like in tennis.
That's right. So can we get this game going? I'm really getting impatient. I'm a super patient person, but right now I'm just so eager to get into the game.
Yeah, that sounds fair. And I'm going to poll on my channel who they think is going to win. Because I love polls, Robert. They're so much fun. Audience interaction, you know?
I wonder what they're going to say.
Yeah, me too. I'll let you guys know what the audience is saying. So vote in the poll, and then I will share what the public is thinking so far. Although they might be influenced because Robert just gave his opinion, and everybody trusts Robert. So I should have asked them before you.
But Magnus Carlsen is the best chess player on the planet. Yeah. So you got to keep that in mind.
That's true. You are giving kind of a controversial opinion.
I was a hot take.
I know, and I like it. I appreciate it, Robert.
It's what I'm here for. Not for telling people about the chess games that are happening. I'm really here for the hot takes.
That is true. Okay, and you guys can vote also in Hikaru's channel. That one is going to be a little bit skewed because you got all of the Hikaru fans who are watching from his very own Twitch channel. But you know what? It doesn't matter. We're not asking for objectivity here. We are asking for the people's opinion.
I think if Magnus gets to even 15%, that's like that's an accomplishment in and of itself.
Well, he's over that right now in Hikaru's channel.
What's he at?
He's at 21% so far. I see some non-believers in the Hikaru chat, you guys. He'll be back. He'll know. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
He'll replay this and see. Wait a sec. Who was it there?
He'll take a look at all these. No, of course not. Okay.
Wow. So what?
Let's see.
I see your poll is pretty split.
Yeah, my poll is a little bit more split. It's 55-45 for Hikaru. So still favoring Hikaru, but it's just going to show how close that is.
Honestly, 55-45 would be approximately the odds that I would give this. I'm just going off the top of my head. I've done 0 calculations, but it does feel like Hikaru is the slight favorite because he has white in this final game of Rapid, and then he gets to choose the color in the Armageddon. Magnus, you put a long match. Nobody has beaten him in a world championship match in classical chess. In online formats, he did beat Hikaru Nakamura in the Magnus Carlsen Invitational in their match from the final in regulation. So, again, there's Magnus. All you need to say is El Magnito, and the people know.
And I'm just going to pull up his card as you say that. There we go.
And then there's Warlord Hikaru. So it's, just look at those accomplishments by Magnus. And Oh, it's too
No,
hard.
world number one ranked player since 2010. A decade of dominance, you guys. That is not somebody who is going to be easy to take down. I mean, it just looks like he's gazing into the heavens to thank them for bestowing this chess talent on him.
Yeah, he is. I mean, he's honestly a gift to the world of chess. His play for the last, his entire life, but in particular the last 10 years, where he's taken the number one spot. He almost lost it very briefly. Fabiano Caruana was just maybe a one win away. If he beat him in a game during that World Championship match in 2018, Fabiano would have been able to leapfrog Magnus and take the number one overall ranking. But that has not happened, and Magnus continues to impress with his over the board play. So we have the game. I see it.
Okay, I'm opening it. We'll do the same thing where you talk about the opening and I update the live board.
If I must, we have this opening here where it's a closed position right now. Earlier in the match, we saw a situation where it was an open Spanish, and I know that that may not mean much to some people, but if you look here, there's no pawns that are attacking each other. So the pawns in the center, e4 and e5, they're both under attack once and defended one time. But you try to think about these positions, can you initiate pawn breaks? Because the side that is able to do so typically is the side with a slight advantage. If white is able to play d4 or able to play a4. And on the flip side, is black able to play a move like d5? So you're trying to weigh these options here, and it changes the dynamic completely.
Absolutely. So, I mean, Hikaru could go for something like a pawn break. He can also play a more patient move, something like knight c3 here. He goes for d3. Okay, cool. So this is a very solid choice by Hikaru. This makes me feel like he's being more cautious.
Yes, I think he's doing exactly what he did in the second game, where he's playing something where the engines will say it's slightly better for white, but the risk of going wrong, he's not really going to go wrong. When you go wrong, it just makes the game equal rather than worse for you.
Right. So he is just trying to minimize his chances of losing the game. Um, Obviously, if he gets an opportunity to push for it, I think either player will go for it. So this is a very symmetrical position. The big difference is that you got that bishop on b7 versus the bishop on b3, and the pawns on the queen side are actually a little bit more advanced for black here. Hikaru just played a3 here. Can you talk a little bit more about what his opening plans might be now that we know he's not going for any pawn breaks?
A3 may seem irrelevant, but the point of A3 is to give the bishop on B3 an escape square. Because oftentimes the knight comes from C6 to A5, which attacks the bishop. But here, knight A5, which is the most commonly played move, is met by bishop to A2. So you don't just have to allow your opponent to take your bishop, which is in a position like this, where the bishop is aiming all the way towards the black king. The bishop is superior. That is why instead of going knight to A5, Magnus dropped his knight back home to B8 to bring it to D7. But you're like, wait, what? Like, why would you do that? Wasn't the knight C6 perfectly fine? Look at the bishop on B7. It has a longer diagonal to work with. And you've also freed up the C7 pawn to go to C5 to take control of the center.
Right, and this is one of those openings where you can afford to play slower moves. And by slower moves, I mean you're not usually supposed to move one of your pieces multiple times in the opening. But both sides are able to do that because there's no, scary king side or queen side or even pawn breaks here. It's a very closed positional game.
That's right. And that's why we keep talking about these pawn breaks, is which side is going to initiate them. And, well, who do you think it's going to be, Alexander? Do you think white is going to... He can go... Okay, let me just point something out. Sorry, I know I asked a question. Then
that's all right, Robert. Go ahead.
You can make a draw here if you're Hikaru by playing knight to G5, which forces pretty much the rook back to F8, and then you can bring your knight back to F3. This is what grandmasters want to draw. This is the type of draw they make. Up, up. You see what move was just played? You see what move was just played, Alexandra? Are you talking? Because I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, what just happened?
I accidentally muted myself when I was moving the mic slightly out of the way.
That is amazing, because I had to mute you the other day, and I was like, am I gone from the internet? Like, what just happened? So I looked at the stream. I'm still here, but I couldn't hear you, but then I saw you were talking.
I'm actually happy that you panicked a little when I was gone. I'll take it as a
Oh
compliment.
my
But
gosh, I was really nervous.
don't worry, Robert. Don't worry. So the question I was asking here is, let's say that Magnus doesn't want to get into Armageddon, and he doesn't want to play Rook F8. Would he have to go for something like D5 here?
Yes, but d5 is super risky. And the reason why is, let's put this on the board. d5, e takes d5. You just want to take back on d5 with your knight. Wasn't that the point?
Yeah,
But
or the bishop.
sure, let's start with the bishop. Let's
Okay.
do that. And then I take you on d5, you take back with your knight, and then white plays a move like queen to h5.
Yikes. That looks a little scary, but can't we just trade off here and take the knight on G5?
You can, but now white is going to claim I have the bishop on the board. The position is still relatively closed. It's solid for white, and that's the kind of imbalance that Hikaru is saying I want to achieve. And for Magnus, and he goes for it. He says, "All right, I'm okay doing so." He doesn't want to just allow this kind of repetition, I guess.
So that makes me think that Magnus thinks that he doesn't want to go up against Hikaru in Armageddon, because if he thought he was more of a favorite in Armageddon, then he would take a draw with the black pieces. He's showing human emotion of fear.
He
Mr. Hess.
maybe, or after Rook F8, there was some other move that white could play, like a knight to E3 jump or something of that sort, that would not have just made a draw immediately.
Got it. So maybe he thought, okay, Hikaru's not going to repeat the position. He'll just play knight E3.
Yeah, which makes sense. White has a little bit more development activity, so you don't have to repeat the position just because it's an option.
You're right. How dare I suggest that maybe he's human?
No,
that was
no,
a mistake.
How
Nah.
dare you? El Magneto.
El Magneto.
Is he mind
clearly an
controlling you right
AI.
now?
He's clearly an AI.
All right, well, we see this exact trade on D5 here.
Do you think Hikaru baited him a little bit into playing something a little less accurate just to not repeat? Because that is another option.
I think ultimately he realized that Rook F8 is just, it doesn't feel like the move you want to play, even if that's what you should play. And here D5, it's not so bad for black, as you were saying. At the end of this, black can take this knight away on G5 after queen comes to H5. So I think that Magnus, this exact position we're seeing, Magnus evaluated this. He's like, all right, it's fine for me. Let's move forward.
Okay, so other than bishop takes G5, that's the move we looked at earlier, saying Hikaru should be happy with that because he gets to keep a bishop on the board. Can he also play something like developing his knight from D7 to F6? Because then he's also protecting against a checkmate, but then F7 is hanging, so nope, that wouldn't work, and that's why he had to exchange. I did the thing where I answer my own question. Sorry about that.
It's okay. I definitely appreciate when you do that, because it gives me time to just do whatever I want, as I feel totally useless, unneeded. Like I can just leave and you'd be fine with that.
No, I just want you to get a couple seconds to relax as well. So F6 played here. That's a little bit weakening of the king side of Magnus, but one thing that you should notice here is that there is no light squared bishop for Hikaru. So even though the light squares are becoming a little bit more weak, it's going to be harder for Hikaru to try to press against them. So now I expect bishop d2, because the only other option was bishop c1, which doesn't make sense. He's not setting up for the next game here. He's playing for a win. And now I love c5 from Magnus, mostly because he needs to get some space here, some attack.
Yeah, c5 also clamps down against white's plan to play d4, because now that the queen's on h5 and there's a knight on d5, if you imagine the pawn e5 is out of the way, then the knight on d5 falls. So that is why a move like d4 is possible in many of these upcoming positions. So don't be surprised when Hikaru plays it.
Right, and c5 would make sure that he can't play d4 right away because of c takes d4. Although, if c5 is played, then, Hikaru can try to prepare d4 in the future. It would just take a little bit more time.
That's right. And I think Magnus wants to play like knight to f8 here, just to bring the knight to e6, stop white from playing d4. But knight f8, I don't believe
and
it
knight
actually...
f8 would stop Hikaru from playing d4, because then the queen would be protecting the knight on d5.
Although, tactically, d4 still works, because if you knight f8, you play d4 and you take my pawn d4, I distract your queen by taking your rook on e8 first, and then that would be
that would just be a free rook in the variation I played out. Oh, sorry, not a free rook, because it's defended by the other rook. Just kidding. Yeah, you would win the knight in that line. Sorry about that.
You're all good. And so that's what Magnus is thinking about right now. He ended up playing f6, pushing the bishop back, but he's trying to figure out, like, okay, d4 is possible in pretty much every variation. How bad is that for me? And what is the best way that I can set myself up? And your move c5, honestly, might just be the move to stop d4.
So then let's talk a little bit about long-term strategies. So we noticed that there is, piece asymmetry where Hikaru has a bishop and a knight versus the two knights. In terms of pawn structures, neither side really has weaknesses. King safety, potentially the black king, is a little bit less safe. Based on those elements, what should White's long-term plan be here?
That's a great question, because let's just imagine d4 is not possible. If we're just thinking about d4, we're thinking about one move. We're not thinking of overall strategy, which is what you asked me to describe. So one of the things that I'm thinking about is I have a queen on h5, and there aren't so many black pieces defending towards the king. So maybe I'll try to improve the position of my knight. The knight in f1, it's not really doing much of anything. So if I can bring my knight into g3 and then into f5, I move my knight from a square that's just in my territory to an aggressive perch where I'm attacking the pawn in g7 and putting some pressure in black's position. Another idea that I'm coming up with is pawn to a4 for white, just saying I am going to initiate some pawn trades to open up some lines. What pieces love opening up the position? Bishops and rooks. I have a rook on a1. I might as well make it seem useful by playing a4 and trying to open up the side of the board. And as well, my bishop on d2, it's staring in both directions. It's taking away things like the a5 square, but also if, let's say, black ever wants to put a pawn on h6, I'm looking already for some potential sacrifices. So the bishop just outclasses the knight in an open board, but if black can keep the position closed and reroute the knights, then black will be the side that's happy.
Well, that is awesome. That is setting up the plan for both sides there. And in terms of rerouting the knight and keeping the position closed, the main moves for Magnus to consider here are moves like c5 and knight f8. The other thing to look at, once again, Magnus is a little bit lower on the clock. He has under 10 minutes and Hikaru has over 14. He plays queen e7 instead. Okay, that seems a little bit strange because he is putting his queen on the semi-open file where the rook is looking towards the queen, which makes it seem like d4 is even more tempting.
Yeah, d4 is tempting, but sometimes you're taking a bite out of the forbidden fruit. And d4, while it's not a terrible move, I think Magnus' idea is just play queen to f7. And once you offer the queen trade, and if the queens do get traded, now that you push your pawn to d4, my knights will try to take advantage of the light squares. White has a dark square bishop, which cannot protect or attack light squares. So that's why a move like d4 can have some problems with it if the knight start going forward on the queen side especially.
And that is such an important difference because just having the pawn on d3 helps protect the light squares a little bit more. So the square on c4, the square on e4. So even just one pawn move can change the structure of the position so much. So queen e7, knight g3 played instead. Speaking of light squares and rerouting your knight, this knight is doing both. And Magnus, regardless, tries to go for queen f7 and offer up the queen trade, which I'm sure Hikaru is not interested in.
I don't think he is, because in a closed endgame, knights become better than bishops, right? Bishops need open space to really feel like they're useful. And so I think you're right that Hikaru will just drop his queen back probably to f3 and claim that that's a more useful diagonal for it.
We have some pretty funny spam going on. Spam this flower to give Hikaru power. It's a cute little rhyme, and the flower is cute. You guys are being cute. Okay, so and of course, I mean, we're doing commentary. This is not a official broadcast. We're also showing it so that you guys can watch Hikaru's games in case that sounds a little bit subjective.
Well, no, I didn't. I think you're doing an excellent job. I don't know if you need any kind of words of affirmation here, but
no, I appreciate it. So queen f3 played, as we mentioned. He wants to keep the queens on the board. And knight f8, this is the plan that you brought up, Robert, with rerouting the knight. So do you still like your a4 idea here?
I'm not sure, because I'm trying to see the follow-up. Like a4, I know that I'm trying to open the a file by taking on b5, but that also opens up the a file for black. So it's not like a one-sided approach there. And I'm trying to think what other ideas come to mind, and if a4 works in tandem with some of these other ideas. Like knight f5 feels glaringly obvious, just bringing my knight forward. We talked about it for a while now. The knight was on f1, bring it forward to g3, bring it forward to f5. And well, what does the knight on f5 really do? It doesn't attack anything just yet, but it does prevent certain things. It prevents black from pushing the c pawn. We talked about an idea like c5, but if you push the c pawn now, my knight goes into the d6 square. So on that note, knight f5 looks like a promising move. But on the flip side, perhaps black will retreat the knight from d5 into e7, and then you have to evaluate once more, like how do knight trades impact the position when then it becomes a knight against a bishop.
Right. So would you rather have two knights versus a knight and a bishop, or one knight? And usually, I always like to mention that two knights are usually better coordinated than a knight and a bishop. So I think that trading off would actually favor Hikaru. But at the same time, you also need to consider the fact that the knight on f5 is placed much better than the knight would be on e7. So Magnus would be trading off a good piece for Hikaru and a so-so piece for himself.
Yeah, and they plays knight e7, and I mean part of this, Alexandra, is you're right. The knight and the knight and the bishop can work together really well, and the two knights can work together well for Magnus, but an issue that is really long term, especially considering the dynamic right now, is that a knight can go from color complex to color complex, right? That knight on f8, once it goes to e6, and you only have a dark square bishop, you can never attack my knight. And that's something you always, 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 always have to think about, even if it doesn't play a part in this specific game. You just want to keep that in the back of your mind of like, hey, wait a second, let me think about that as just the inherent way the pieces move.
And I'll go back to serious talk soon, but now I see that people wanted to make it more fair, so there's also spam this Dorito to help Magneto. So it's between the Doritos and the flowers here. I guess this is chess fans in 2020. I can't say I'm mad about it, honestly. Okay, so the knights have been traded off, and a4 is now pushed, going for that pawn break you discussed. And Magnus has options here. He's certainly not going to take on a4 because then the rook can take on a4 and double up on the a file. So he has the option of pushing b4 or moving his rook to b8 to just give it some extra support there. The only thing with moving his rook to b8 here is that it's now going to be the white rook that gets the open file.
I'm sorry. Now I'm the one who's looking at the chat. Spam this tree to let the plebs be free.
We got some serious rhymers in this chat.
This is actually just kind of hilarious. Anyway, the pawns were traded on b5. Now you look, there's a rook on a1. The black rook moved off of a8 because note that if the rook were still on a8 right now, there's a queen on f3 and the rook on a1 would both be attacking the square. Mm-hmm. So black would have lost the rook there. So that's why Magnus shoved his rook over. And all right, this is starting to look a little bit more promising for Hikaru, in that he can play a move like rook a7 and bring his rook from e1, where it's not really doing anything of note, over to a1 and making use of the open file.
Yeah, I do like this position for him. One thing that Magnus has done well is played a little bit more quickly because, you know, we saw that he got in time pressure in the first game that he lost, and that was a little bit of an issue for him. So he's doing that well. Rook a7 looks fantastic for Hikaru. I mean, you get your rook on an open file on the 7th rank, you're feeling really good. But Magnus is also going to be rerouting his knight to e6 at some point, so he's going to be holding on c7. What plans should Magnus go for here? Should he just be reactive, or do you think he has more?
He has to be reactive for the time being, just because it's white's move, and the more immediate pressure will be for white, like rook a7. For instance, you're putting pressure on c7. But I like your point about knight e6. It covers the c7 pawn. It also can threaten to go into d4. If the bishop ever leaves the d2 square and goes off to a new diagonal, maybe the queen on e7 will jump over to b4, where it starts hitting some of these queenside pawns. And these are just the counter chances you need to think about in this position, not just get focused on your plans, but also on your opponents.
And Hikaru is the one thinking now. So are there any options between rook a7, or you think he's just going deeper into that line?
Rook a7 feels so natural to me here. I'm trying to think of other possibilities. It's good to not just be focused on one move and one move only. Maybe there's some variations where instead of having the rook on a7, it's better to have it on a5, hitting the b5 pawn. Or rook a6 was played.
Okay.
So clearly clearly he thinks this is the square, and I'm trying to work out why, but I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, so rook a6 makes me think that he could potentially move his rook to c6 at some point, and what that does well is it keeps the c7 pawn stuck. Maybe moves like c5 could be annoying if Magnus opens up the position. That might not be the idea. What else could he be going for? Um, okay, so the queen moved to d7. Very slow moves here from Magnus.
And maybe Hikaru's idea was put the queen on c6. So by putting the queen on d7, you're like, all right, I'm happy to trade you on c6 now. It's not really a big deal, as once we trade, I put my knight on e6, as you pointed out before, protecting the c7 pawn. And then you can even bring, you're getting towards an endgame. Right? We're not in endgame now. If there are queens on the board, there are rooks. But when you get towards the endgame, you start thinking about bringing your king towards the center and towards the action. So the black king has a quick route from into f7 and then over towards the queen side even, whereas the white king, even if it moves outward, not too much going on.
Okay, and Hikaru continues with a pretty intuitive plan. He just doubles his rooks on the open A file. Magnus, same thing. He plays knight e6, which is a move we've just kind of been waiting to see when he's going to go for. And now Hikaru has his pieces basically on their optimal squares, so maybe the rook on a7 is a slight improvement here. How can he continue pushing here? What is the next play?
I think it's just an aesthetically pleasing position for white, where you have control of the open file. Your bishop is looking good. Your queen's looking good in f3, hitting the whole diagonal over there. But I really don't feel like there's a way to apply more pressure to black squares. And queen c6 was played. Perhaps Hikaru says, without the queens on the board, now I can go into light squares and try to attack some of your pawns. But this also could be an admission that, hey, we're just going to start trading pieces off, and there isn't too much available for me.
Well, I mean, if the queens are traded off, Hikaru does have the better position here. The two pawns are unable to protect themselves, his rooks are more active, and he also has a bishop versus a knight in a position that is quickly opening up. So some slight advantages, probably not enough to win here, but he is the only one with winning chances so far.
Agreed. And if I'm Magnus, I'm thinking about the move rook to d6, because I don't like the thought of you bring your a1 rook to a6 and just keeping my pieces defending the knight on e6. It feels a little bit uncomfortable, even if it's okay. But rook d6 changes the position completely. And if you trade on d6 there, then you have a pawn that's gone from c7 to d6, but that pawn on b5 looks a bit lonely as well. So it's a decision that I think was too committal, and that's why Magnus decided to just bring his king into f7.
Okay, king f7, he wanted to activate the rook regardless, but now I really love the move rook a7. Best square to put your rook on, putting more pressure on c7, really tying the knight to e6. Luckily for Magnus, that pawn on c7 is not going to be easily attacked by the bishop. Maybe something like bishop d2, bishop a5, so he does have time in case he needs to defend it with his rooks as well. Instead, Hikaru plays rook a5, putting pressure on b5. So we can either push the pawn to defend it or bring our rook in. He decides to bring the rook in, and Hikaru plays rook a6.
So now the king would love to go to d7 for black, but you can't go king e7 as you lose your knight on e6.
Right. So he needs to make sure that that rook continues defending the knight. Magnus puts his rook on b7, a really good defensive motive for him, because now if ever rook a7, he can trade off, and he's protecting both of his pawns with this move.
Yeah, this is still better for white. It's better for Hikaru because his rook on c6 is pestering black. You want to kick that rook out with knight to d8, but you kind of want your knight on like d8 and e6 at the same time, because when the knight moves away from e6, white's rook can go to c5, and that's also a good square for the white rook because it attacks b5. It puts an attack on the pawn c7. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some kind of knight d8, knight back to e6, forcing Hikaru to move elsewhere. But still, I mean, the lasting nagging advantage is here for Hikaru.
G3, that's a really slow move. As you said, probably holding the f4 square. At some point, Hikaru will also want to bring his king into the endgame, but he's not rushing with that just because he's just making sure that he's removing some of his opponent's squares. Now we're going to see the plan that you just talked about. So where is the rook going to go? He has to go off the 6 file. He has to go to c5 or c3. He picks c5 because it's putting pressure on the b5 pawn. Do you think Magnus might try to repeat here? Yep.
He does.
He answered the question for us.
He did. He answered it very quickly. And I think Magnus has no problem trading off one pair of rooks, and Hikaru is avoiding that by just making this repetition.
So we're going to see an Armageddon?
We are going to see an Armageddon.
It's a draw. Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. I'm hyped. I'm nervous. I'm really scared here. Putting up the updated score 2-2. So we get an Armageddon. And okay, need a breather. Alexandra, why don't we put up the graphic again?
I'm not even playing. Sorry.
No, why don't we put the graphic up again to explain Armageddon for those of you who maybe knew. Oh my gosh. So it's one game for the entire match. White gets 5 minutes, black gets 4 minutes, but if there is a draw, black wins the game. So white needs to win and make use of that extra minute on the clock.
Yeah, and Hikaru is the one who gets to pick what color he is going to get. Does he want white? Does he want black? We were talking about how he's picked black in the past, but he did have an uncomfortable position with black in this in this matchup so far. Any predictions, Robert? Now with how the games have been going, got a little bit more information.
I think Hikaru has to take the black pieces. I think he must, because you only need to draw in, with the black pieces, and it's hard to beat Magnus Carlsen. Let's talk about his classical record right now. Mm-hmm. How many games is his unbeaten streak right now? 112, something like that?
Oh, that's a huge streak.
Magnus Carlsen has not lost a classical. That's a long time control game of chess since, if I'm not mistaken, July 30th, 2018.
Wow, but that is not the case in his rapid games. I mean, he lost one game just today, so it's a very different situation. And Hikaru picked the black pieces, so he is going to have 1 minute less on the clock, but draw odds.
So Hikaru chooses black, the draw odds. He understands that, hey, beating Magnus ain't an easy task. I just did it earlier today, and I did it yesterday as well. But let me just make sure that all I need is the half point. Alexandra, oh my gosh. Magnus with white, Hikaru with black. A must-win situation for Magnus. But the last time he was in a must-win situation, in round 3, it felt like a must-win situation at least. Magnus did win that game.
All right. Well, Robert, are you sticking to your suggestion that Hikaru is the favorite with something like 55-45% odds?
Well, that was before this first game here.
Right.
And now I'm not sure. I still think Hikaru has to be the favorite because draw is such a likely result. But if you look at the head-to-head between these players, it is in one direction. And I'm not talking about Harry Styles.
Wow, great reference there. I mean, One Direction, are they even relevant anymore?
Whoa, that sounds like fighting words. Oh. That sounds like fighting words. Come on, it's literally the story of your life, Alexandra.
All right, and I'm getting a background song to put on during this game to make it a little bit more intense.
What song is it? Because I can't hear.
Well, it is a original song. It's called DK Another World. And it's Hikaru's hype song, apparently. Chessbait just sent it to me, so we will have it in the background, you guys. Just to make things a little bit more intense.
Can you send me the link or something?
Yeah, so that you understand it as well. Sorry, Robert, of course.
Although if I listen to it, then yeah,
no, but it's very quiet in the background. It's a soothing song.
I don't want to be in sync with the song.
You want to do your own thing.
I thought you were going to say you want to be Backstreet Boys. I thought that would be really fun.
No, I leave the outdated band references to you. I don't want to take that away from you, Robert.
Okay, firstly, they're not outdated just because you say so. Like Ninja Turtles, you might say, oh, these are outdated. Grow out of it. Get older. Mature, man. I'm like, no, come on. I'm bringing it back. Why can't we just bring some of these old school things back? Gosh, Alexandra.
No, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
So, wow. Hikaru gets black. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this. So Hikaru gets black.
I'm just putting the Armageddon format again because people are tuning in and out. So this is what's about to happen. And I guess while we're waiting for the game, this is not an issue to keep on.
Oh my gosh. I'm just like trying to figure out. Hikaru with the black pieces only needs a draw. Magnus needs to win. What should each side do? If you made me go full coach mode, you're like, tell me, what do I play, Robert? I think Magnus, he needs to play very quickly and play a position just like he did in game 3, where it's easy for white to make moves, and even if you're down a pawn, just make it so that Hikaru's life is as difficult as possible. And if you're Hikaru, you probably don't want to repeat the line you had earlier because you're not feeling good about it after losing that game, but maybe he's studying that line right now in the time between games, and he's going to find a way to improve on it. And so I think that actually Magnus will be the first one to deviate. Okay,
well, that is a very, thought out prediction, and I always appreciate seeing what you're going to think there. Do you think we should do another poll and see how the audience's opinion has changed with this last game?
Let's do a poll.
All right, so let's do a poll in both of the chats, you guys. We'll let you know what the vote is.
And across everyone's channels, it seems like we have over 60,000 viewers on this game here. So that's pretty awesome to see. All the excitement about Magnus Carlsen versus Hikaru Nakamura. And I'm curious if the polls changed. Because now with just one game remaining, I'm sure we're in Hikaru's channel. Everyone is supporting Hikaru there. But I'm wondering if we'll see a different result on the poll.
Yeah, and I'm getting the results so far. I will wait because there's another minute in the poll, and I'll let you guys know. I mean, we're still waiting for the game to start, so we have a little bit of time. Okay, this is a very interesting poll result I'm seeing so far. There's been a shift since before this game on who people think the favorite is. It's 60-40 for Hikaru so far, based on the votes in my channel.
I just don't know how to weigh the extra minute. Hikaru's so fast, but Magnus Carlsen's also really fast. Oh man, I don't know.
And do you have any predictions for what opening Magnus is going to start with? I know it's hard to be specific, but just for fun, like give it a shot.
I think if we go, can you just put up the starting position for a second?
The starting position from
just move one, like.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
So I just want to say that earlier today in the first game, Magnus played E4 on the first move, right?
Yes.
In the third game, when he had white for the second time, he played D4 on the first move. So Magnus has already shown a willingness to switch the game on the very first move. And so that is why I'm currently sitting here like trying to rack my brain. What is Magnus going to do? And as I said earlier, with Magnus, you have to expect the unexpected. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he just made a different first move altogether and then said to Hikaru, you better be well prepared and you're going to be on your own 2 feet. It's not going to be a repetition of something happened earlier today because it's a blitz game.
So maybe we're going to see a C4 here?
Oh, it's a dynamite move right from the get-go.
That would be fascinating. Okay, well, I'm very excited to see what he's going to go for. Although, as you mentioned, in the third game, he played D4, and that is when he got the best opening position. So if he does repeat one of these, I wouldn't be surprised to see him go for D4 again.
I feel like D4 was more to his liking, and it also, especially the type of position he had, there's more optionality. And options can be a bad thing, right? In a classical game, just like, whoa, that's great. I have more moves to make. I have different plans. I feel good about that. But in Blitz, when you have so many different moves and each one has a drawback, you're like, oh no. And then you look at your clock. I just went from 3.5 minutes to 3 minutes and 10 seconds. And you just start freaking out. We've all had those moments where we just look at the clock and we freak out. So
very true.
Oh
well, we couldn't have asked for a better semifinals matchup here. 2-2, just head to head, very close here. One game where we're gonna have a winner decided real soon.
Real soon. And when do we think
the game should be starting any minute? Okay, I got it. I got it on the board. It's pulled up.
Oh my gosh. And we have the board. I mean, I'm really just trying to keep my cool here, but I don't think I've been this excited about like a game since 2018.
That's
it's been years.
Very fair. That's very fair. Okay, I have the live board started. Hikaru with the black pieces, Magnus with the white pieces. 5 minutes versus 4. I'm just gonna refresh it to see if the clocks are popping up properly here.
Is there still music? Because I can't hear it. So
Yeah,
I'm just curious.
yeah.
What's going on.
There's still music.
I mean, I kind of wish I could hear the music so it would soothe me, but now I'm just. I guess the music is your voice, right? That's what they would say.
That's exactly what they would say in my dreams, because my voice is actually not something most people want to listen to when I'm singing and not talking. All right, so the clocks are going to show up after move 1, I'm being told. So we're waiting here. We have the game set up. The anticipation is there.
All right, and you heard me go full auctioneer mode earlier. Am I going to have to do that again? Is that what's going to happen? Because they're going to be moving so quickly that the speed of my points are going to have to move at the same kind of time?
Absolutely, Robert. We're going to keep up with the speed here. We're going to be talking a lot faster, so very different time format than what we've been seeing until now. And I think the shorter the time format goes, the more it favors Hikaru. And we see D4 moved by Magnus Carlsen.
All right, and these moves are going to come in very quickly. So he's going for a similar line that we just saw in game 3, and we get E3 this time. Bishop E2, same exact variation. Well, D takes D4, and A6 played by Hikaru. So this is a difference. The knight went to B6 in that previous game.
All right. Oh, wow, the moves are coming in so quickly. So C takes D4 on move 11, E takes D4 followed up here. Knight B6. So do you think Hikaru is playing this game? Whoa. The moves are lagging a little bit behind their speed. They are playing so quickly that even the relay looks like it's going nuts.
It is going nuts. And, well, this is actually standard opening play from both sides here. And the bishop on C6, you give up the bishop pair so that when black goes B takes C6, you're so reinforced on the D5 square. So that isolated pawn often wants to try to move. It can't move here because look at all the black pieces staring at D5. The knight on B4 is safe and sound, and it's protecting the pawn on C6. You can't kick it because you have no pawn to hit it with, and the bishop on G3 is in no way going to attack it. But I still like white's position.
Yeah, white has a slightly better position, and Magnus has done a good job at keeping his time advantage. I do like what Hikaru is doing by putting his knights on the center with D5. The bishop cannot take because he can also fix his pawn structure afterwards. But Hikaru has a backwards pawn on C6. Magnus also has an isolated pawn on D4, but the pawn on D4 is also giving his pieces space and control over the dark squares. And it looks like Magnus is going for some type of kingside attack here.
And he's trying to induce F6 because as soon as you play F6, the E6 pawn becomes weaker. Hikaru just drops his bishop back to F8, but watch out for some kind of, if that knight were not on D5, knight F6 check would be devastating. So that is a tactical idea that I'm keeping my eye out on. And actually, bishop takes D5. You have to take with the knight on D5, and then I would take the C6 pawn.
Uh-oh, that looked... Sorry, the song has changed in the background there. Okay.
All right,
you know
the bishop
what?
went to D6.
I'm not going to leave music on. Okay, so the bishop went to D6.
And that was, again, this by playing F6, your E6 pawn feels weaker. There's a light square bishop for white, so that knight on D5 has to stay there. The pawn on C6 feeling like a target. I would try to play rook C5, rook D1 to C1, go after the pawns on the queen side.
Okay, and bishop takes D5 still looks tempting here.
Oh, it's a good move. Yeah,
because bishop takes D5, it seemed like we would have had to see the knight take. But okay, it doesn't matter. This was not played. It is a rapid time control here. Sorry, a blitz time control here. So they're going to be moving much faster than ever before. I'm starting to worry a little bit for Hikaru's pawns here. He is the one who's been on the defensive here. Again, he still has draw odds, so it's not the worst thing in the world.
And look at the time situation where white is still ahead on the clock, of course, but it's not the full minute that the game started with. But we're getting closer to 0. There's no increment whatsoever. So you can spend some time if you're Magnus, as long as you keep at least a slight advantage in the clock.
Right. And one thing that Hikaru could be going for is eventually pushing E5. He does have to be careful of when he plays it, though, because he's going to open up the D file, and then there's going to be threats on his D5 knight.
Yeah, and anytime you make a move like E5, moving your pawn off a light square, and you're having a bishop for white on the light square, it can be dangerous. I would try to go after the A5 pawn, knight B3 here. Just moving the knight back, attacking A5, maybe getting my knight into D4 and over into F5. At some point, watch out for that knight to go from C5 all the way over to the king side.
He plays instead rook D2, preparing to double his rooks here. He can still play knight B3 now as well to defend his rook, or rook CD1, both good options here. Hikaru is gaining on the clock. He's almost equal here.
And Alexandra, maybe just refresh so the clocks will tick. I know it just happens with the relay, but Right now it's about equal on the clock, but I don't think the position is equal. I think that Magnus actually has quite a sizable advantage. And I see the evaluation bar saying, plus zero point 0.6 up to 0.8, all this stuff. But I think just practically, it looks really nice for white. You can drop this bishop home to f1 in the near future. The c6 pawn is weak. The a5 pawn needs defense. And here, bishop f4, rook e2 maybe.
Oh, rook e2 is a really intimidating looking move, but then Hikaru could just retreat his queen back. And what is the issue after the rook trade?
Then the a5 pawn, though, you're losing the defender. The queen on e5 defends a5. So rook e2 played by Magnus. And where's that queen going?
Yeah, is there any way he can continue defending this pawn at the same time? I mean, there's nowhere he can put his queen that is a safe square to continue. So he has to lose the pawn on a5. 2 minutes on the clock for both of them. So he does play queen c7. We are going to see the trade-off and the pawn on e5 being stolen there. Okay, so now Hikaru is down a pawn. What are his best drawing chances?
His drawing chances is somehow he gets that queenside pawn. But right now, if knight takes a5, knight takes a4 for black, then you steal the pawn back. But white will play pawn to b3. I'm not giving you my pawn on b2. Actually, maybe queen b3 attacks both your knights as well. So it's not just about this pawn on the queen side is what I'm trying to get at. There's also the king on h8 is less safe than the king on g1.
Okay, Hikaru just played queen e5 and the engine evaluation went nuts. It looks like it's a blunder. I still like your move with moving the bishop away because then we're putting pressure on c6.
But he's hitting the knight on a5, so that's a little trick that Hikaru has up his sleeve. Is that knight on a5 uncomfortable. You may just
so
take
what about
on c6
bishop
right
f7 then to attack the rook and attack c6? Although you have to deal with rook f8 threats potentially.
But no, then you can't take on c6 because you'll never be able to take the bishop on f7, then the back rank checkmate. So that's actually a really beautiful move, bishop f7. Nice find there.
Well, you led me into it. So Magnus taking his time here. Oh, he moved knight b3. He didn't play it. Okay, Hikaru has some chances now.
Oh, and Hikaru's up on the clock, is he not?
Yeah, he has 1 minute 39 to 1:08. Somehow Hikaru kind of survived this, and now his time situation is okay. Magnus plays bishop f7, but it's too late. It would have worked better previously.
Yeah, that's a move too late. It was rook c4, so he's hoping for some back rank stuff, but rook takes f7, rook takes b4. The queen on e5 covers the b8 square, so you're not going to be able to checkmate me on b8. So actually, you can take this bishop and lose your knight in the process, and go knight takes b2, and the queen is holding everything together.
Okay, well, this is as good as the position has looked so far for Hikaru here. We're gonna recapture the knight.
Oh, queen e1 check! Queen e1! The rook's hanging!
Oh my gosh! He blundered a rook!
He blundered the rook! So Magnus went in for it. He's now down on the clock. He's also down a rook. And Hikaru wins the game.
And he resigned! Hikaru just defeated Magnus. He is moving on to the finals in the Lindor's Appy Rapid Challenge. Magnus had what looked like a winning combination that he missed. Then he ended up getting in time pressure and he blundered a full piece.
Oh my gosh, what just happened here? Hikaru Nakamura withstands the pressure, what looked like a much worse position.
And I'll go back to that position as well.
Swinging up for white, and then, wow, in one move, the game concludes in black's favor.
Oh, man. Okay, let me go back to that moment. So it was rook takes e7, it was knight takes a5, queen e5, and here's when Magnus played knight b3. So let's just look at the idea. So bishop f7 would have been interesting here. So if the rook just moves away somewhere like c8, the problem is that this pawn is just hanging and Magnus is going to be up 2 full passed pawns. Instead, if Hikaru would have tried to attack the bishop here to get some counterplay, the problem with that is that Magnus doesn't have to retreat his bishop. He can instead take on c6 because of the beautiful tactic that Robert actually pointed out. So knight takes c6, queen or rook takes c6. I feel like it doesn't matter. I'm just going to take with the rook here. And if actually it does matter, you take with the queen, because then if rook takes, you have queen c8, knight takes. I'm going to play it out on the board. Queen c8, knight takes, rook takes, and then either way he blocks with yes checkmate. So that doesn't work here. And if he can't take the bishop in this position, he's just playing against 2 passed pawns.
I can't believe it. I mean, I'm in shock because also there are like 47,000 people watching on Hikaru's chat. Shout out to all of you for believing in your warlord, Hikaru Nakamura. But Magnus, I mean, this game was going his way. There were many moments here where you just
let me know if there's another position you'd like to go back to.
There are plenty of them. Actually, there was a moment that you called my attention to, in fact, on move, what was it? Move 25, black went queen to b8.
Okay.
And you were saying, oh, bishop takes d5 is still possible here. But I think we both weren't looking for the exact tactic that makes it so strong. Is after bishop takes d5, if you take the queen on g3, I don't take the queen back right away, right? I take the pawn e6 with check, and then I am up a piece into the endgame.
Right.
And if you
because the king
take
moves
back
away, and then we're just able to recapture the queen, and now I'll go back to the other position.
and after bishop takes d5, if you just go c takes d5, so if you just take back with the pawn, then I have knight takes f6 check, which is brilliant because the rook can't capture the knight on f6 because your queen needs the defense of the rook, and the pawn can't capture the knight on f6 because the pawn is pinned to the king. So you'll be able to steal a pawn there with that move bishop takes d5.
Yeah, that is incredible. So, I mean, would there been any other options? Let's say, yeah, you take with the e-pawn. I mean, the same thing happens with the c-pawn and the e-pawn. You can continue to take on f6. And so if he would have taken back with the knight, then c6 would have been hanging. Magnus would have grabbed an extra pawn here, also looking towards e6. So even if b2 hangs, it's not actually a problem.
What a game that was. I mean, seriously, you got to give a huge shout out to both of these players.
Oh, sorry. Apparently, I went a little bit too quickly over here. Yeah, I'll definitely replay it. So let's say that Hikaru would have captured the pawn here. The problem is that this rook is defending the queen on b8. The queen is looking towards the queen on b8 at the same time. So you make a move like knight takes f6, which looks silly because the rook seems like he could capture the knight. The problem is the rook cannot move because it is too busy defending the queen on b8 in this situation. You cannot take with the pawn because then your king is exposed. It's an illegal move. If you play something like king h8 here, then he can just move his queen away. He's gotten an extra pawn. And on top of getting an extra pawn, Hikaru also has a worse pawn structure with the backwards pawn on e6. So this is a much better position for Magnus.
Ooh, and the position still was better for Magnus, but Hikaru was moving very quickly. And there was that one critical moment as well on move 37 when Magnus thought forever. You were just showing the line. And it's less to me even about the line, but how long he spent playing knight to b3, right? Like he ended up losing all of his winning chances. The engine just shot right back down saying it's equal, but he spent so much time making that move. He was really desperately trying to find a winning attack and a winning, position, something that he can play for more, and just did simple knight takes c6 there instead. Like bishop f7 was complex, but knight takes c6. I'm
going to let you keep explaining this because I'm inviting Hikaru to the Zoom call. So
awesome.
Go ahead.
I was just saying that even if not for these complicated lines with bishop moving out of the way, just knight takes c6, you're stealing a pawn off the board, and at the very least, white will end up a pawn ahead and with good winning chances. So a really surprising decision there by Magnus Carlsen, and a great reaction by Hikaru, understanding that, hey, wait a second, and you're not actually going to get away with this.
And I'll just put up the position again. So rook takes b4 was the blunder here. The reason that this is a blunder is because of queen e1 check, threatening the king and the rook at the same time. So Hikaru is about to win a full piece here. Very easy for him. So instead, is this a position you were explaining, Robert, after rook takes f7, what Magnus could have done instead?
Well, he could have played a different move, right? Instead of losing the rook, which obviously was bad, he can make a move there like queen e4, which threatens the knight another time, tries to put more pressure there, but you're trading queens, and now you've even material left.
Well, not even material yet, because so Hikaru is still up an extra knight here, but the issue is that we have a back rank threat as well as the knight. So Hikaru has to do something about it. Maybe king g8, because if rook e8, then you block with the rook. You're no longer getting checkmated. And once this happens, now Hikaru can finally recapture the knight. And now I'll go back to your explanation.
No, that's it. You explained everything I was trying to get at. You have control over the board. You got it ready. And is Hikaru coming our way soon? I can't wait.
Yeah, he's going to be coming soon. I'm going to pull up the brackets so that you can explain them while I set up the Zoom call details.
All right, well, now that Hikaru Nakamura has defeated Magnus Carlsen and moved on to the finals, he gets to play Daniil Dubov. And Magnus Carlsen was seen as sort of the ultimate test, but there is one more match remaining, and Hikaru is not going to take Dubov for granted. Daniil Dubov is the 2018 World Rapid Chess Champion. This is a rapid tournament, and Hikaru just beat Magnus, who was the 2019 World Rapid Champion. But, might be nice to time travel and beat the guy who won the year before that. So Dubov is very strong. I think he's been underestimated thus far by pretty much everybody. But now that he's in the final, he is going to try to take out Hikaru Nakamura, which clearly is no easy feat.
Right. Just continue going even deeper into that explanation.
Okay, I'll go even deeper into the bracket. So if we look across the way here, these are 8 of the world's best chess players. And Dubov just swept Ding Liren, who was the number 3 rated classical player on the planet. So Ding Liren is a monster, and Daniil Dubov he slayed one of the beasts in his path towards the championship. So he's going to take on Hikaru Nakamura, who is going to be in great spirits. They get the day off tomorrow. It's a rest day. And the finals will begin on Monday.
Okay, yeah. And I'm back. We're still waiting for Hikaru, who he will be joining soon. Oh no, the layout changed too quickly. That's okay, guys. Hikaru will be coming soon and the layout will look okay.
Essentially, Hikaru's face will replace that chessboard there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in that case, let's just go to this one. It's a little bit clean. This is just us waiting for Hikaru. You know what? I tried to be smooth about it. I'm sorry, Chad.
So if we're just waiting for him, do we wait in silence? Do we just, sit here and we've been talking a lot, at least I have, I feel like. So should I just, I'm going to throw it back to you. You put the bracket up and made me talk. I'm going to wait for Hikaru in silence.
I mean, when is the last time that Hikaru beat Magnus in a head-to-head match? I ask you because you usually know these, but if it's a tough question, we'll just get somebody in our chat to reply.
It's possible that the answer is never, honestly. This might have been the first time.
This may have been the first time. Wow.
I can't think of any match over a long series of games where Hikaru was the winner after that match. He's beaten Magnus in games, obviously, but I can't think of a single match when they played head-to-head that Hikaru won, except for this one.
Right, and we're not talking head-to-head in a direct game like Chad is saying. We know that he won yesterday, but overall, because it was a best out of 3.
Right, and wow. Yeah, I can't think of a single other time. And he also was down 1-0. He lost the first match, and he got swept in that first match.
That first match made the prospects look really bad for Hikaru.
You couldn't write this story any better.
You really couldn't have. It had all of the, the plot, everything thickening, seeming like it's an impossible feat for Hikaru to come back through. The impossible opponent. It was just perfect. What a story.
I feel it is a great story. I feel like I should do an audiobook. And on May 28th, 2020, when the world was locked down in quarantine, Hikaru Nakamura, he went against the mighty beast of Magnus Carlsen. El Magnito took the lead 1-0. But then the next day, the sun rose, and there came Hikaru Nakamura, your warlord. He was injured but not defeated. He came back and won. He tweeted at Magnus Carlsen saying, Monkus. Then, with 1-1, everything hanging in the balance, Hikaru goes up 1.5. We see a 2-2 tie once Magnus Carlsen wins game 3. They draw game 4. Hikaru chooses the black pieces. All he needs to do is make a draw. And no, he doesn't just draw. He checks. He hits the rook. He wins it. And he wins the match and makes it to the finals of the Lindor's Abbey Rapid Challenge. Alexandra, back to you.
I have nothing to say after that brilliant performance. I mean, the only person who can top that is Hikaru joining us on this Zoom call very soon. All I did was add some background music for you. That was beautiful. Chat, wow. You guys were here. Hess is a gift. These games were incredible. I mean, Magnus must not be feeling too good now. Let's maybe talk a little bit looking into the future. How are Hikaru's chances against Daniil Dubov? You probably were talking about the bracket already. No.
After I just did all that, you're immediately throwing it back to me?
I'm sorry. You're right. You're a gift. I don't deserve you.
No, whoa. No, let nobody tell you that. That is... So you're asking me about Daniil Dubov versus Hikaru Nakamura, and we heard Hikaru's thoughts about Daniil yesterday when after Hikaru won the second match, he was praising Dubov, saying this guy is a really creative player, and over a long series of games, a long classical tournament, he just feels like Daniil hasn't been able to kind of maintain the pace that he sometimes starts out on against these top players in the world. But in the rapid format, he won the 2018 World Rapid Championship, and he's clearly in good form in this tournament. So there's no reason that Hikaru Nakamura will take him for granted. He's like, whoa, this is a fantastic player. He just beat Ding Ren, and if he just beat, him, he could also beat me. And that's what happens at the highest level of chess. That who wins in a certain match or a certain day doesn't necessarily mean that they're the quote unquote better player overall, but it happens even in a single game. Whereas if somebody who's an international master beats a grandmaster in that one game, then it's like, whoa, that can happen.
Hikaru is waiting. I'm about to admit him to the Zoom call.
Oh, let's get him so I can stop talking.
Hey, Hikaru, congratulations. We're live. I'm just fixing the scene.
I think we should ask you that question. How is it going, Hikaru?
Oh, am I on already? Right on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, you're
okay,
right on.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, it's taking a little while to sink in, certainly. It's a very, very weird day. I think, like, when I won that second game, you start getting you start feeling really optimistic that good things are going to happen. And then I lost the third game really fast. So it hasn't really sunk in, but I'm obviously very happy. I think the fans are there are a lot of people watching today, I saw. So big shout out to everybody for all the support, honestly. I think a lot of these people kind of they sort of inspired me to keep pushing, because obviously after the first day, which was really, really bad, I don't think anyone would have thought that it was possible that I would beat Magnus. So it's amazing, really, and I'm just glad, even if normally I lose him at least one time, I get a victory.
Well, Alexandra asked me that. She was like, have you beaten Magnus in any extended match before? Or was this the first time?
Yeah, this was the first time, certainly. I think actually that's, in many ways, for me, this kind of means a lot more than even if, say, there are a couple of games that I didn't win, like, for example, in the World Blitz and Rapid or other events. But because this was extended, it wasn't just, say, a 2-game match or just an individual game. Certainly, I think it holds a lot more weight, because beating Magnus basically in a 12-game match in any format is certainly very rare. And it's a great feeling.
And you sound a little tired.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am tired. I mean, I'll find the energy when I go live in like 15, 20 minutes. But I think, yeah, it's just sort of one of those things where I really felt good after the second game, and then to lose the third game, that kind of deflates you a lot. So it's just, yeah, I'm definitely tired. It's not easy playing against any of these guys, especially with all the nerves and, especially an Armageddon game at the end to finish. But yeah, it's just happy, really.
Well, congratulations again. And in this last game we were watching, when Magnus played knight b3 on move 37, did you think that he missed bishop f7? Was that something you were concerned about?
I guess the way I viewed it was kind of that I'm probably losing, but I'm just gonna play fast. I wasn't really calculating that much. I was doing very basic, like 2 to 3 move sequences, and that's it. I didn't ever really want to use too much time, because I thought that if I did, I'd probably just lose the game on the clock as well as probably the board. So just playing quickly. I had a feeling he had something here, but luckily he didn't see bishop f7. It's not an easy move to see, I don't think. And then yeah, just after he misses, I think the game was kind of, the chances of winning at least were gone. So it's yeah, I'll take it.
Well, I have to ask, you got to the Armageddon, you chose the black pieces. Did you always know you were going to choose black, or did the way the match went in the rapid portion kind of influence your decision?
No, I always knew I was going to pick black. Also, because when I played Magnus in the Magnus Invitational in the first game, I think he won the toss and he got to choose the color, and so he chose black, and I had to play white. And I think trying to beat Magnus, first of all, it's very hard no matter which color you have, but trying to beat him in a must-win situation where I think in general, if you can get out of the opening pretty quickly without using much time as black, it's very advantageous. I was always going to pick black in this case. There was never any doubt in my mind. That was always a foregone conclusion.
And we saw him make that rook blunder at the end there. Do you think it was just a time pressure situation, or do you have any deeper insights into it that we may not have thought of?
Well, first of all, thanks very quickly, since I do have the chat open and I see it. Thanks to everybody for all the love and support. I think we're gonna hit 10K subs. You guys are all amazing. Thank you so much. First, let me say that. Yeah. So okay. So at the end of the game, so here's what's funny. I didn't actually see Queen E1 for quite a while. So I think I thought for like 15 seconds. Because what I was trying to figure out is where can I play like Knight B2? Do I go Rook F7? And then I think somewhere in there I saw Knight B2, Rook takes B4, Queen E1 check, and I realized that I could just take the bishop on F7. Which just wins the game.
Yeah, you picked up the rook. I freaked out. I'm going to be honest. I was like, oh my gosh, this game is ending immediately. But even without winning the rook there, right? Your position is already looking like it's pretty solid. So Magnus spent a lot of time before he eventually retreated knight to B3 in that position. Could he not have just taken your pawn on C6, kept an advantage on the clock, and made you work for?
Well, I mean, I think the clock was already pretty close to even at that point. I think I might have already been up on the clock, in fact. I mean, the key is bishop f7, knight c6, queen b2, and I'm not sure why white is better, actually. Because knight c6 is the very obvious move. Right. And then queen b2. And, yeah, I don't actually know how white's better after queen b2. Well, did you have a move, Robert?
No, I don't even know if white will remain better, but I was just looking at that position and thinking that there at least you can play for something. So even if you're not winning on the spot or much better anymore, maybe you've got some kind of I don't know. There has to be some kind of back rank threat that I'm not seeing. But that's what the idea was, that Magnus can just play for something that just didn't allow you to liquidate and get easier equality.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think bishop f7 is a very hard move to find, because if you don't see the idea with knight c4, then the only moves you're going to consider are knight c6 or knight b3. And I assume what happened is Magnus probably spent a lot of time looking at knight c6 and couldn't make it work, and so he just played the natural knight b3 retreating move. And after that, it's of course the whole thing is gone for white.
So you said you felt the nerves. So can you tell everybody?
I don't know about nerves. I would say stress. It's very stressful.
Yeah, that's probably a more accurate way of putting it. But like, when you won that second game, you're feeling happy. You're feeling like, okay, I can do this. Like, do you think in a sense that maybe distracted you heading into the third game, or was just a really well played game by Magnus in game 3?
Magnus played well in game 3. I also confused the variations as well. And I think in a certain way, losing the way I lost in game 3 was good, because I wasn't ever in that game. I think if I had been in that game, like let's say I get to move 15 or move 20, and we get a position like we had in the Armageddon game where Magnus just gets a slow advantage and starts grinding, then I think it would have been a lot worse, because then you have the time to realize you had a chance. If you hold that game, you're probably going to win the match. So the fact that I lost, I mean, basically just lost without putting up a fight in that third game certainly helped me a bit, because then I didn't really have time to think about a missed opportunity. And then in game 4, you just play. So yeah, I think I would say stress is a word, because what Magnus does better than anybody else is he finds ways to keep the game going. So even when you think you're out of the woods, there's always some little trick that he finds. And that's, I think, what makes him such a great player, but also makes it really hard to play against him psychologically. There are many times you think you're out of the woods, you're fine, and then there's some little trick, and you always have to be on the lookout for that. And yeah, fortunately I found a way, but it was quite a ride.
And on the fourth game, it seemed like you went for a variation that could have repeated. Were you at all trying to force an Armageddon?
If he had played Rook F8, I would have gone back and then decided. I don't know what I would have done. I wasn't really happy with that variation specifically, so I think most likely I would have repeated. But in the heat of the moment, I might have done something else as well. So yeah, it's just it was great to at least put some pressure on him in this game too, because I felt like I was a little bit better in this end game. He defended and there was nothing, but still I wasn't ever in danger. And I think that also helped as well. When you're in the last game, in such a situation, let's say that Magnus gets some kind of advantage out of this. He gets an open center, and like I have to struggle to make the draw. I think that also would have affected me a little bit, but the fact that it was pretty smooth, a smooth draw in the fourth game also helped for the Armageddon. And just like, yeah, I felt like the fans certainly want the clown fiesta at the end. So so I think the fans got what they wanted.
Well, you're very happy, as you should be, but you're probably not satisfied because the tournament's still going on, right? So you have a very strong player ahead of you. How do you get past this? I mean, you celebrate it, you have a day off tomorrow, and it's an amazing achievement that very few people can claim that they've done. But how do you kind of push that aside for the time being, because you have such a talented player to face in the final?
Well, I mean, I'm gonna be busy nonetheless. I don't know about celebration. I have to do some coaching for Twitch Rivals for starters. So I don't know about celebrating at all, certainly, and I'll be streaming later. But yeah, I think Daniil is a very strong player. I'm fortunate that I've played him many times online, so I am pretty familiar with his style. He's very creative, so I'm expecting him to do a lot of stuff that I certainly have not prepared for, and where I'll have to find a lot of moves over the board. But again, I think being in the final is great, and I'm just gonna let it sink in and do my usual stuff, and then I'll really start thinking about it tomorrow evening. But for right now, I'm not. That's the back of my mind. That's really not what I'm thinking about.
And you will be coming on shortly and doing your usual game analysis. So for all of the viewers who are watching, you guys will get to see the inner workings of Hikaru's brain very soon.
Right.
Well, Hikaru, I mean, major congratulations. You had so many people here watching. I think your channel got up to some like 47K, and then there was Forzin was watching, Breckful's been watching, a lot of support for you, and you've really done a lot to grow chess, and I think you've made the people very happy.
Yeah, I think certainly it's amazing to see the number of people who are watching chess. I think it shows that competitive chess, even when people can't necessarily understand everything that's going on, the fact that people want to watch something competitive like chess, which is very filled with drama. I mean, the games, not the other stuff, but the fact that you have games that are very high intensity, a lot of drama going on. It's just great to see that so many people love the game of chess, and I couldn't be happier that all these streamers are watching as well and just spreading it, because that at the end of the day I think is the most important thing. So just big shout out to Forrest, and big shout out to Byron, of course. I mean, long time friend. Thanks for all the support as well. So thanks to everybody.
Well, thanks so much, Hikaru, to yourself as well. If there's any last words you want to say, if not, we can do the usual switcheroo to get you on stream.
I'm just gonna go get some coffee, probably make a little bit of food, and I'll see everybody in like 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah, sounds great. Go take a very well-deserved rest. Congratulations again.
Thank you. See you
Congrats,
guys.
Hikaru.
All right, see you.
Wow. I mean, you heard it from the man himself. Just what an accomplishment. Really, it was his first time beating Magnus in an extended match. He's just, it's kind of like, oh, look at me.
Don't worry, I'm fixing it, Robert.
You can see part of my shoulder up top, and then you see me down low. And now I don't know what's going on. I feel like I'm disconnected from my body.
Hang on.
This is an out-of-body experience.
You're back. Yeah, I'm bringing you back, Robert.
Let me experience it. You're ruining it for me. There's so many people watching, and you're taking it away from me. That was my moment.
This is still your moment. Your moment.
No, I don't like that you control this anymore.
You can control it tomorrow if you want.
I was in the middle of some point that I no longer remember because now I'm just grounded. Look what you've done.
Oh, man. Well, I guess let's just go back to the bracket one more time as we are doing that summary. It was really awesome to get Hikaru on the stream again. Incredible feat. It was confirmed that this was the first time in a while the first time he won him in a direct match like this. So Hikaru's not here anymore, but do you think that's going to change Hikaru's psychology? Because maybe he's always had a tough time playing against him since that had never happened yet.
I think that it does give you confidence. You know that you can do it. And of course, Hikaru Nakamura is a strong enough chess player where he's able to accomplish that. But as Hikaru himself said, the stress of playing Magnus, where he puts you under pressure, even in a position that you feel like you're taking your foot off the gas pedal, I'm fine. I'm getting out of this. It's no big deal. Then you see one more move, and it's just like, wait. Oh, shoot, that piece is weak. That pawn is under attack. And then you keep having to find move after move after move. And Hikaru Nakamura did just that. He lost game 3, and that evened the score up once more. But I like what he said, because I actually think that's the case. And we were talking about this, Alexandra, right? He didn't resign because he was giving himself more of a break. He was never in that game to begin with because he just got really blown off the board. He mixed up his opening variation. But it didn't hurt his psyche because he's like, all right, I know I can play better chess than that, and I will going forward.
Absolutely. And shout out to you guys in his chat. He just hit 10,000 subs on Twitch, you guys. Thanks so much for supporting him. I mean, he is just blowing up here, and with the performance he had today, it's we can understand why. I'm pulling up the bracket one more time. What day are we going to be seeing this final on, Robert?
Monday.
Okay.
The new Rebecca Black hit single.
There we go. So there will be a rest day tomorrow. As we mentioned, he's not going to be taking that much time off. But on Monday, the games will resume. We will be back on this channel at 10 a.m. Eastern.
We certainly will. And I just want to give a shout out to, not just Hikaru Nakamura, whose channel, we're on. We really appreciate that. And all the fans here, the moderators, you guys are doing excellent stuff. But I do want to give a shout out to Magnus Carlsen, because I know there's been a lot of drama going on behind the scenes, but he is an amazing ambassador for the game as well. He is the world champion. And you got to admit that, but then you also have to say Hikaru Nakamura just took down the world champion. So, it just was settled over the chessboard right now. There will be more matches between those two, plenty more, of course. But for today, we just got to let it sink in. Hikaru Nakamura comes back from a one-match deficit. He wins the second match. He wins the third match in Armageddon. You could not script it any more dramatically. I mean, what a match. And it's just such an honor, Alexandra, that I was able to cover it